By a little past 3 in the afternoon, the train finally pulled into a bustling human settlement. It passed through several small towns as the sun dipped west, then eased into the platform. Platform 9 3/4 at King's Cross Station was already crowded with people waiting for arrivals. Before the train had even stopped, the younger students were a chaotic whirl, some changing clothes, some hauling trunks, some calling out to friends. Ted and 3 other boys had been sent to the corridor to change out of their wizarding robes while the 2 girls changed in the carriage. When the train came to a steady halt and the doors opened, the children poured out carrying trunks and parcels, and the platform became instantly packed, busier than at the start of term, with people everywhere. The 6 of them stuck close together, afraid of getting separated. A slightly childish voice then called from a distance. "Neville! Mum, I see Neville!" The shout was high and excited and carried across the crowd. Ted thought, "Where have I heard that before?" Neville, standing nearby, pulled his neck down, wishing he were less noticeable. He was half a head taller than most of the other first years. Ron's face darkened. "Oh, good heavens, Ginny! I'm your brother! Didn't you see me?" he complained to the little girl pushing through the crowd. Behind her came a red-haired couple. The man was tall, smiling and approachable, his hair thinning at the forehead in that affable British way. The woman was short and plump, her face all warmth. "Oh, Ron, you've grown so much," Mr. Weasley said. Molly, nearby, took him by the shoulders, squealing. "Peggy wrote to us and said you got exceeds expectations in all your subjects and earned 50 points for Gryffindor. Is that true?" Ron, always more reserved with his family than he was in the Great Hall, answered modestly. "Only 50 points. Ted and Hermione earned more than 100 points for Ravenclaw." He hurried on, eager to introduce his friends. "By the way, Mum and Dad, this is Harry and Neville. You know them already. This is Ted." He gestured toward Ted. Ted stepped forward and offered his hand. "Hello, Mr. Weasley. I'm Ted." He shook Arthur's hand and then took Molly's in both hands. "Aunt Molly, thank you for the sweater. It fits very well and is so warm. Thank you." Molly beamed. "Oh, dear. I'm glad you like it. Lugette, if you have the time, do come round to the Burrow and try my cooking." "I will," Ted promised. "This is Hermione, the top student of Ravenclaw," Ron added, pointing her out. Hermione greeted the Weasleys politely. They nodded in return. Compared to Ted and Jerry, Ron didn't make as many fussily polite remarks for his parents, so they treated Hermione more as an ordinary friend of Ron's than anything else. "This is Jerry," Ron continued, slipping an arm around Jerry. Jerry shrank back a little, shy. Molly immediately hugged him. "Good boy. Come and visit with Ted sometime." Jerry looked nearly overcome. No one had ever invited him to their home before. As they talked, Ginny stared fixedly at Neville. She stared so hard, Neville wished he could sink into the ground. Neville's most dreaded part of the Weasleys had always been this. As he liked to say, before he even started school, he went to the Weasleys and their youngest daughter looked like she was going to eat him. Ginny was the 7th child, and in this world 7 was a powerful number. She had a strong knack for magic. Being the 7th child seemed to do something magical to you. At that moment, Sirius, looking rakish with a small mustache, arrived with his gentle, beautiful wife. "Sirius! Olivia!" Harry's face lit up and he ran over to hug them. Not far off came an elderly woman with a stern face. She had the look of someone who could scold a Transfiguration underachiever into obedience, much like Professor McGonagall. She was of medium height, dressed formally, and wore a hat shaped like an eagle. Ted found the hat odd at first, then felt a clear magical tug from it. It wasn't mere eccentricity. Someone had enchanted that hat. Behind her was a short, plump man in his 40s. Uncle," Neville stammered. Neville's grandmother, the elderly Mrs. Longbottom, nodded and then turned to the others. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friends?" "Oh," Neville flushed and introduced them. "This is Ted, Mrs. Wadd." Longbottom thanked Ted for helping Neville and invited him to visit when he could. The Weasleys, Sirius, and Mrs. Longbottom were all veterans of the old Order of the Phoenix. Now their children were classmates and friends, and old ties naturally loosened into new, easy warmth. Soon enough, the rest of the Weasleys arrived. Fred and George and Ginny's aunts and uncles, and someone named Peggy joined them, and after a round of goodbyes, everyone went their separate ways. Sirius and his wife vanished using the flu network from the platform. Mrs. Longbottom and her companions did the same. Jerry took a ministry channel back to his semi-human settlement. The Weasleys left on foot toward their car. Mr. Weasley had modified it, and he was unmistakably proud of it. He looked at Ted and Hermione with the sort of anticipatory grin of someone who couldn't wait to explain how it all worked. Ted knew enough about Muggle engineering to be interested. "Mr. Weasley, you work on cars too? That's amazing," he said, and Mr. Weasley took the bait, talking enthusiastically about Muggle machines and how odd it was that they did such clever things without magic. Ted replied calmly, drawing on years of reading and researching. Mr. Weasley felt delighted. He hadn't had such a lovely conversation in ages. They passed through the red brick arches and arrived at Platform 9 in the Muggle portion of the station, where some Muggle parents were waiting, Hermione's among them. "Dad, Mum!" Hermione ran to her parents, and introductions began again. The Grangers and the Weasleys settled into easy conversation. The women talked about cooking and knitting sweaters, while the men debated dental care and the principles of engines. When conversation lagged, they always had the weather to fall back on. "The weather today is terrible, isn't it?" someone said. "Ted, would you like to come to our house sometime?" Hermione asked suddenly. Ted patted her arm. "Thank you, Hermione. I'll drop my things at the Leaky Cauldron first, and then have Ansu write to you, okay? You know, we still have a lot to learn, and time's tight. Maybe I'll invite you to Diagon Alley for shopping then." Ted politely declined Hermione's offer for now. He wasn't fond of visiting other people's homes and found it awkward. Perhaps another time. After promising Mr. Weasley he'd have a drink with him, Mr. Granger started the car and drove off. Hermione waved from the window. "Well then, let's get going too," Mr. Weasley said. Since they were passing the Leaky Cauldron, he offered Ted a lift. It looked like an ordinary two-box sedan. 7 people got in, and nothing seemed odd, except that Ted took care to glance around to make sure no curious muggles were watching before slipping behind the wheel. There, the interior felt far more spacious than the exterior suggested. Mr. Weasley had cast an undetectable extension charm, and the inside was as roomy as a small minivan. When they arrived at the Leaky Cauldron, Ted hauled his luggage out and waved to the Weasleys. Ron leaned out the window and called, "Remember to write to me." Fred and George shouted together, "Don't forget our plan. The plan. What are you two up to now? Don't drag Ted into it." Aunt Molly snapped, her face suddenly stern at the mention of the twins' schemes. Mr. Weasley waved and the car eased away. Ted watched it turn the corner, then turned toward the familiar narrow storefront. "Ah, old Tom, I'm back again," he said, smiling into the warm, dim doorway. "All right, Volume 1 concludes. 102, Alchemy, God Forever. Ha, old Tom, it's me, Ted, I'm back." Ted pushed the door open with Hu-Han-Sun trailing behind him and grinned at old Tom, who was straightening glasses behind the counter. "You rascal," old Tom said, folding his lined face into a smile. He'd wondered whether Ted would come back to stay now that it was Hogwarts holiday, but he hadn't expected it for real. "What? Did you get addicted to living in a cupboard?" he joked. Ted puffed up with pride. "No, this time give me a top-tier room, a heavenly Class A. I'm rich now. I'm going to be a permanent resident." Old Tom looked him over. Ted had grown a lot in the year at school, taller, more mature, but he still didn't exactly look wealthy. Who made money while still at school anyway? For old time's sake, old Tom said, "All right, you get 20% off for permanent residency." He grabbed a brass key from the rack and tossed it to Ted. "You know where it is. Go on up." Ted took the key, hauled his luggage to a large sunny room on the second floor, and settled in. After dropping his things, he went back down, waved to old Tom, and slipped out into the backyard. He drew his wand, tapped a loose brick in the wall, and the entrance to Diagon Alley shimmered into being. Diagon Alley was mercifully less capricious than the book version. No enchanted rubbish bins or suddenly rising walls. Ted went straight to Gringotts. He needed to exchange some metal for currency. A bald, white-haired goblin took his gold and examined it with a magnifying glass and scales, frowning at the small, immaculate piece in Ted's hand. The goblin's suspicion was natural. Goblins were used to judging wealth by appearance, and Ted's clothes didn't scream affluence. After several meticulous checks, though, the goblin nodded. It was genuine and of very high purity. 1 ounce, 28.3 grams, exchanged for 64 galleons. A pleasant little wave of wealth. That was only part of the gold Ted had made with alchemy this month. He still had 3 slightly smaller pieces tucked away. Note, I'd previously written an absurdly high figure, nearly 40 gin per month, because I miscalculated. The correct monthly total is about 100 grams. Sorry to my math teacher. Even with the conservative estimate, Ted's income from alchemy alone was at least around 220 galleons a month. Alchemy truly was a godsend. To put that in context, in the original books, Dumbledore could pay Dobby 10 galleons a week, about 40 a month, and a mid to upper level ministry official earned close to 250 galleons. In any case, Ted no longer had to worry about daily expenses and even had extra for magical research. Ted decided to exchange part of his funds into Muggle money. "Give me 100 pounds, 20 galleons worth," he told the goblin. The goblin blinked. "You want to exchange galleons for pounds? Are you certain?" Goblins often changed pounds into galleons because many half-blood or Muggle-born wizards needed wizarding currency. The other direction, galleons into pounds, was a rarity, sometimes not happening in a whole year. The goblin's eyes glittered at the chance. 2 conversions meant taking a cut twice over. He completed the transaction with a delighted, incredulous expression. From Gringotts, Ted went to Mr. Giggs' apothecary. He planned to work in Diagon Alley during the holidays. Before last Christmas, Ted and his first-year classmates had signed a contract with the ministry. Their wands were monitored by the Trace, which can detect magic use nearby. The Trace is designed to prevent Muggle-born wizards from performing magic openly in the Muggle world and risking the statute of secrecy. If Ted wanted to cast freely over the holidays, he had to stay wherever other wizards were, like Diagon Alley, where the ministry couldn't tell who was doing the magic. Children from wizarding families could rely on their parents to explain any incidents, but Muggleborns like Hermione had to be careful. Now Ted no longer needed several part-time jobs to make ends meet. He'd stick to helping Mr. Giggs and spend the rest of his holiday on study and research. He pushed open the apothecary door to find Mr. Giggs knee-deep in a mountain of fresh herbs. June to August was peak harvest season. Apothecaries and potion makers stocked up for the year, processing herbs that couldn't be collected again until next season. Last year, Ted had been expected to learn 7 or 8 new herbs a day and memorize their properties, effects, contraindications, and processing methods. Mr. Giggs hadn't expected much help when he first hired Ted, but the boy had turned out to be a prodigy, at least with the aid of a memory palace and a stamina-restoring green card, Ted admitted. "Hi, Mr. Giggs. Long time no see," Ted called. Mr. Giggs looked up and grinned. "Oh, lad, you're on holiday? I hope school was wonderful. Letters said you were sorted into Ravenclaw. Excellent. Ravenclaws are the clever ones." Indeed, Mr. Giggs was a Ravenclaw graduate himself. Ted rolled up his sleeves, pulled on dragonhide gloves, and set to work sorting herbs and doing pre-packaging. They still had to do preliminary processing and a few more steps later, but Ted adjusted scales carefully so each packet weighed the same, wrapped them in oil paper, and organized them. The year at school was like a dream, except for Professor Snape, Ted said with a sly smile. Everything else was perfect. "Ah, Snape," Mr. Giggs chuckled and shrugged. "That fellow always looks so glum. I can't imagine what he's like as a professor." Mr. Giggs had been a few years younger than people like James Potter, Sirius, and Snape, and had seen their antics in his time. He respected Snape's potion-making skills, though. There's no denying his talent with potions. In some ways, he might even outshine Professor Slughorn, Mr. Giggs said, referring to the former head of Slytherin who had been potion professor. Being in the same house made them easy conversational partners. Ted griped about outdated potion textbooks, the impracticality of some potion classes, and the lack of systematic instruction. Mr. Giggs sympathized. "I'm not saying anything bad, but Arsenius Giggs' Magical Drafts and Potions is a fine book, except it was published decades ago. It doesn't even cover the new herbs that appeared after the last 2 celestial conjunctions." Mr. Giggs fussed over a tray of freshly brewed calming draught. "No one's writing a modern, comprehensive potion manual now. It's too difficult. Take the calming draught, discovered 12 years ago, and since then, we've discovered 6 major effects we didn't know before. It was like an astronomy student spending years studying a star, only to have it explode halfway through writing the thesis. The work would have to be revised or abandoned. They processed herbs for nearly 2 hours. Initial pre-packaging was finished around noon. New deliveries would come in a few days. Mr. Giggs checked his watch and said, "Don't leave for noon. Stay for lunch. My treat." He looked Ted over. "You don't want to go back to the Muggle world during your holiday, do you? Stay on and help. It's busy now. Sometimes I barely get time for dinner, and many common potions sell out before I can brew them." Ted was happy to stay. He wanted to learn more about herbs and potions from Mr. Giggs. Mr. Giggs might not be Snape, but he was willing to teach. After lunch, they worked a while longer. Ted then went to the orphanage to visit Grandma. They chatted for a long time, and Ted handed her a crisp 100 pounds. "Grandma, I'm doing well at school, and I have part-time work and savings. Please take this. It's to help the orphanage." Grandma tried to refuse. "The money you sent at Christmas was already so much. You're young. You'll need it yourself." Ted smiled. "Grandma, you forget. I can sing too. I'll keep working and performing during the holiday. Please accept it." Thanks to friend 44422 for 1,500 points of support. Thanks to friend Warrialt City for 246 points. Thanks to friend May Everyone Be Safe All Their Lives for 500 points. Thanks to friend Seeker of the Myriad Worlds for 100 points. Thank you all. 103, #1 salted fish seller. After leaving the orphanage, Ted bought a handful of Muggle gifts for his wizard friends and then headed back to the Leaky Cauldron. "Old Tom, look at what I've brought you," he said, holding up an exquisite porcelain wine bottle. Old Tom sniffed and turned it over in his hands. This is..." Ted shook the bottle with a grin. "A specialty from the Celestial Empire, Old Bagan." Ted had been in the magical world for over a year now. Working in Diagon Alley had taught him the value of things. Most items in the wizarding market cost far more than their Muggle equivalents. That wasn't surprising. Differences in productivity mattered. Wizards could use magic, but many production steps still couldn't be skipped. How could the small family-run wineries compare to modern factories that produced wine by the ton? Of course, the mass-produced stuff in the Muggle world was cheaper. But Ted's gifts weren't just cheap, they were novel. Over 70% of wizards had barely any contact with Muggles. They didn't know how to buy a bus ticket or take a subway. A ticket gate would probably stump them for 2 hours. So Muggle trinkets seemed exotic. Ron, for example, nearly choked on the variety of sweets Ted had brought from a Muggle candy shop. That evening, Ted went back up to his room and instead of studying, lay against the headboard and thought. He'd had an idea the previous year, start a second-hand trading platform in Diagon Alley. Not a single shop, but a marketplace, like the Xianyu website he'd seen in the Muggle world. It felt promising. Many second-hand magical items were valuable. Magic didn't depreciate the way technology did. A wand or enchanted object kept its properties for decades. But objects could fall out of use. Say a household had an automatic lawnmower and then turned the lawn into a vegetable garden. Keeping it would be wasteful. Selling to a second-hand shop would mean accepting a pittance. Second-hand shops made huge profits, but they weren't something anyone could run. Dangerous objects required skill. Places like Borgin and Burke's dealt in items that could kill a careless shopkeeper within months. The British wizarding population was small, probably under 30,000, and many witches and wizards were reclusive. That made honest, efficient transactions hard. Ted had spotted the gap. A reliable trading platform would be valuable. It could even cut into the ministry's territory. But ideas needed capital. Galleons, ability, influence, and power all mattered. Ted didn't plan anything unrealistic right now. He only wanted to use the holiday to upgrade his appraisal talent. Lately, appraisal had hit a bottleneck. Either he needed to raise his mind mage level to boost his mental power, or he needed stimulation, appraising rare, high-end items. There was a shortcut. Appraise someone like Dumbledore. He'd already used appraisal on several professors and had once, at the end of the Philosopher's Stone challenge, appraised Voldemort in a weakened state and gained a lot. That had pushed appraisal forward as much as appraising 20 or 30 professors would. Appraising Dumbledore at full strength would be enormous, but he didn't dare. So he had a different plan. Run second-hand transactions, use appraisal on items to gain experience, and collect data to measure the magical market. His instructor had always emphasized in-depth investigation. If Ted wanted to build something later, he couldn't skip that step. First, he needed Mr. Giggs' support. You mean you want to set up a stall outside the shop? That's not the problem. The problem is, what will you actually do? Sell things? Tell fortunes? Mr. Giggs's face was a picture, like someone who'd seen a fortune-telling stall turn up in front of a five-star hotel. He was a wizard, and his business perspective was cautious. Ted explained, "It's like this. In the library, I solved a magical puzzle and got a kind of magic left by a senior. It seems to have activated something in me. Now I can appraise the properties and info of objects." That was half true and half made up. The library charm he'd found was the paper crane messaging charm, but telling Mr. Giggs that would be unnecessary. "So I'll appraise things people want to sell, list them on a board, and make it easier for buyers to find them. Consignment, bartering, that sort of thing." Mr. Giggs listened and grew more interested, but his caution remained. "Ted, this isn't a game. Appraising magical items requires knowledge and judgment. A bad appraisal might only cost a few galleons, but a dangerous item could kill you." Ted flashed a confident smile. "You can test me." Mr. Giggs rummaged through his collection and placed 3 items on the table. "All right, let's see what you've got. These aren't ordinary things." He wanted to see the proud boy fail and be humbled. Ted looked up at the first item, a small statue, about 25 centimeters tall. It was humanoid, but not human, with a very fat body, 2 heads, each crowned with a single horn, one head with a single eye, the other with 2. It had sharp teeth and clutched a large club. A 2-headed ogre, clearly. Ted activated appraisal. Mr. Giggs watched closely and felt Ted's gaze brighten, though he sensed no magical surge. Strange, he thought. "This is a 2-headed ogre statue," Ted said. "Bronze, cast with enchantment from outside this world. It grants strength and slowly restores stamina to those within its influence." Mr. Giggs clapped. "Ted, do you really have a talent for appraisal? Amazing. Not a single mistake. Better than I expected." Ted's appraisal had revealed more. The effective radius was about 8 meters. The effect was roughly a +2 to strength, and the statue had to be heated with fire every month or its magic would degrade after a few years. Mr. Giggs beamed. The second item was a dull gray stone. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but under scrutiny, its crystalline structure showed murky, with a gray mist trapped inside. "A rare magic crystal from Uruguay," Ted said. "It forms where magic veins converge in mines. Looks suitable for crafting magical items." "Exactly. When I bought it, the seller said it was a magic crystal from Uruguay. I wasn't wrong." Mr. Giggs was delighted. The third item was a fruit, dark red with a hard shell like a mangosteen. Its interior was a mystery. "I can't see much on this one," Ted admitted. "Only that it's a plant with medicinal properties. Where did you get it?" Mr. Giggs puffed up with a proud, almost mischievous look. "Ha! You don't know, do you?" "Neither do I. I found it while collecting herbs last year. Seems to be some sort of magical plant fruit from another world. No one's researched it yet." Ted breathed a private sigh of relief. He knew what the fruit was, roa fruit from the lands between, but he'd kept that to himself. He was only a 12-year-old orphan wizard. Showing too much would be risky. Knowing how to be low-key was a survival skill. With Mr. Giggs convinced, the Xianyu website stall was a go. Soon Diagon Alley strollers noticed a table outside Giggs's apothecary with a sign, Xianyu website. Passers-by puzzled over the name. Giggs wasn't usually in the second-hand trade, but a closer look revealed small print. Xianyu website undertakes second-hand magical item appraisal, consignment, and guarantee services. We support cash, consignment sales, and barter. Below that, a few sample listings. 80% new rainproof and moisture-proof cloaks, 90% condition automatic magical copper scales, alarm crystals, celestial empire biting cabbage seeds. These were Mr. Giggs's donations to avoid an empty stall and build trust. Ted had also acquired a 1.5-meter-long, arm-thick chunk of bow-truckle wood at an internal price, obtained during Mr. Giggs's herb-gathering expedition last year, when a potion had stunned several bow-truckles and the wood was cut away. Despicable? Perhaps, but handy. Seeing people gather, Ted launched into a shout. "Hey, come take a look, don't miss out! For those who've been north and south, to the States and London port, who've traveled and hiked and gone off to study, if you haven't seen the Xianyu website, your information channels aren't authentic. Excitement mattered more than sense. Even if people didn't fully understand what he was saying, they came closer. Ted grinned and continued to boast, already picturing the stall's first customers. It is impossible to pick up the leak. It is impossible to pick up the leak. To serve the wide wizarding public and make transactions more convenient, so you don't have to meet up and haggle all the time, I hereby launch the Xianyu website for everyone's use. Our motto, making every trade easy. You heard me. For the first 3 days, all item appraisals are free. No charge. I said no charge. I don't want any galleons. Tell me the second-hand items you want to sell, and I'll list them on our trading board for free. Interested buyers can come to you directly. No middlemen skimming the difference. Of course, I recommend you bring the items here for an appraisal. It's a guarantee. That reassures sellers, and if there's a problem, we'll compensate. If we misjudge, it means our skill was lacking. We deserve the penalty. Ted stood on a little stool, playing the part of an enthusiastic, rousing pitchman, every bit the Southern-style huckster, whipping the crowd into a mood. Unconsciously, he'd amplified his charm art and even laced his words with a little mind power, making his speech unusually persuasive. It didn't take long for someone to bite. That waterproof, moisture-proof cloak, how much is it? It looks 80% new. Can I see it? Ted's eyes lit up. He hadn't arranged any shills, but this customer volunteered. Don't worry, if there's a quality issue, the Xianyu website will compensate 100%. Waterproof cloak, right? Come and take a look. He produced a dusty gray cloak, cast aguamenti, and not a single drop clung to the fabric. Because you're our first customer, I'll give you an executive 20% off. We'll pay the seller the discounted portion. Do you actually need a waterproof cloak? He asked earnestly. We don't encourage impulse buys. Don't buy something you'll never use. Maybe it was the face, the smile, the voice, or the thoughtful advice, but the customer felt at ease. I do, he said. Next month I'm on business in Bergen, Norway, for at least 2 months. Bergen's the city of rain. Those are the wettest months. I can't be casting waterproof spells dozens of times a day. If I had this cloak, it would make things so much easier. Then you need it. 2 galleons and 16 sickles with the 20% off. I wish you a smooth trip. After a little more gentle persuasion, the man bought the cloak, smiling as he left. Seeing that sale, others were immediately intrigued. Some asked to list items, some requested the seller keep an eye out for particular goods. Business took off. That afternoon, Ted sent Ansu to Levenker with a letter for Jerry, asking him to come to Diagon Alley once he'd settled. Levenker was the Ministry of Magic's settlement for subhumans, perched on the border between England and Scotland. It was a mountainous village, largely made up of subhumans, people whose appearance made it impractical to live among muggles. When Levenker was established, the ministry placed strict surveillance on it and set up muggle-repelling charms to prevent contact between subhumans and ordinary muggles, thus protecting the statute of secrecy. The charm's definition of muggle was literal: ordinary, non-magical people. Subhumans, muggle-converted vampires and werewolves, and even squibs weren't considered muggles and weren't affected by the charm. Ansu, now a fairly large creature with a 1.5-meter wingspan, flew incredibly fast. It crossed more than half the country from London to Levenker in 3 hours. It bobbed its head and looked around the village in curiosity, only settling once Jerry unhooked the letter from its leg. Jerry thanked it with his treasured small biscuits. He opened Ted's letter, read it, and brightened immediately. At that moment, a woman's voice came from the doorway. Jerry, did someone come? It's a letter from my friend Ted. Remember I told you about him? Jerry called back. The woman entered, in her 30s, with the same big, fluffy round ears on either side of her head. Though not old, her face held a tiredness that years of hardship had carved into her. Life had not been easy for subhuman families in the past. Jerry wanted to work in Diagon Alley to help change that. Mom, he said in a low voice, I want to work in Diagon Alley. Ted said he found me a job. I can stay in the leaky cauldron room with him and come back 1 day a week. His mother stroked his ears, reluctant but resigned. You just got back. I can help now, Mom. I want to help. All right, she sighed. You've grown. Leave tonight. I'll pack your things. You can use Uncle Pooley's fireplace to get there. Ansu returned that afternoon, bursting through the window and complaining theatrically, I'm exhausted. Caw, caw, caw. Thank you for your hard work, Ted said, handing it a few pieces of beef jerky. The distance was not short. Ansu's magic and stamina made it possible in a day. Ansu puffed up its chest. Not far, but I fought an eagle on the way. Very tiring. Caw, caw. It pulled out a long, beautiful tail feather and preened. Ted frowned. Must you go starting fights everywhere? We need harmony, not banditry. Ansu ignored him and hopped onto the table. Jerry said he's coming tonight through the fireplace to the leaky cauldron. Caw, caw. Around 4 in the afternoon, Ted waited by the pub's fireplace. With a soft pop, green flames flared and a small figure stepped out, peeking around cautiously. Hey, Jerry! Ted shut his book and pulled him free. Hi, Ted. How are you? Jerry beamed, excited and a little awed. His life of work was just beginning. That evening, Ted treated Jerry to lots of good food and took him to a Muggle cheese shop. It was Jerry's first real encounter with Muggle society, and he was astonished. Wide-brimmed hat pulled low, he followed Ted like a country child in a big city, eyes taking everything in, Tom and Jerry style. The next day, Ted brought Jerry to Mr. Giggs's apothecary. This is my good friend Jerry, Ted said. Things are busy. He can come and help out. Her business was booming that year, so Mr. Giggs welcomed the help. Jerry would begin with simple herb processing tasks, just as Ted had once. His pay, however, was higher than Ted's had been. Jerry had a foundation from Hogwarts in potions and herbology. Ted had started from scratch. Ted, meanwhile, handled high-level material processing and brewed popular potions for Mr. Giggs, earning dozens of experience points a day. Jerry also took a second job, receptionist for the Xianyu website. When Ted was tied up, Jerry received customers who wanted items appraised or listed or who came just to browse. He was astonished the Xianyu website was essentially a single table operation, but Ted had already mobilized every connection he had. Old items Mr. Giggs didn't need, junk from old Tom's basement, Ted repaired, cleaned, and listed everything. He wrote to the Weasley twins and to Harry, asking if they had any unused secondhand goods to help build inventory. He even scavenged secondhand shops himself for good, cheap items to list. Quantity mattered at first. You had to have things to attract attention. For a high-magic tech company like the Xianyu website, creating buzz was essential. Ted threw together an eye-catching presentation, and in a few days managed to appraise 5 or 6 high-end items, 2 of which the system flagged as red quality, the same tier as the pseudo-philosopher's stone he wore around his neck. They were family heirlooms brought in for appraisal. The classic plot of finding a hidden gem in the bargain basement didn't unfold this time, but Ted still earned experience points, usually 8 to 10 per high-end appraisal, and that wasn't wasted effort. During this period, he also acquired 2 useful magical materials. And on a meta note, thanks went out to book friend Clever and Peerless Me for 500 points of reward, and to Me Who Puts Away My Saber and Plants Flowers to See the World, and No Sugar Reward for 100 points each. Thank you. 105. Hatching and Crystal Parker. Do you remember when Ted discovered the Ravenclaw Chamber of Secrets before Christmas last year? At the time, a quest rewarded him with a card, Rhea's Last Egg Purple. It was an egg of an Azeroth red dragon, and if it could be hatched, it would be remarkable. This was not Hagrid's Norwegian Ridgeback. Dragons in this world are called fire dragons. In settings like Azeroth or D&D, they'd be more like dragonkin. They have low intelligence and can't speak. Their strength is limited. They can't use magic. They don't shift into humanoid forms, and they don't live for millennia. Ted had already looked into the hatching requirements and found they demanded far too many high-end materials. He'd even thought he wouldn't be able to gather them all before graduation. Then, unexpectedly, 2 needed items turned up in the past few days, Terra Magic's silver ore and a high-strength magical creature fossil. The former is a vein of silver ore, altered by magic in a particular environment. Because it was still ore and unrefined, only goblins or expert metalworkers would recognize it. A wizard had tried to sell some stuff to a second-hand shop, which passed on the ore. It was intercepted by Ted's Xianyu website. The fossil was an ancient canine magical beast's bone that had, under special conditions, condensed residual magic into a hardened fossil over many years. It's rare and not broadly useful. A little wizard found it at home, and his mother almost threw it away, then tossed it into a bundle of second-hand goods listed for free on Xianyu. The sellers didn't know what they had, so they sold the two items in bundles for next to nothing, less than half a galleon in total. The wizard mother of the fossil even traded it for a Muggle toy car. It was an incredible bargain. Ted grinned. Of course, a protagonist finds bargains. What would he be if he didn't? With the two materials in hand, he felt energized, but it still wasn't simple. The red dragon egg required 40 different magical materials, plus the right magic and temperature to hatch. 16 of those materials were on the market, but exorbitantly priced. Buying them would cost 2,000 to 3,000 galleons. The other 24 weren't traded at all. Mr. Giggs had only heard of a few and had never actually seen most of them. Ted couldn't realistically complete that in the near term. He had to hope Xianyu grew big enough that the platform's data would help him locate the rest. Since dragon hatching was out of reach for now, he returned to his original plan, hatching a spirit crystal servant. When Ted became a mind mage, he gained an ability that hadn't yet been used, the spirit crystal servant. It's unique to mind mages. A fragment of the mind is replicated into a crystal and develops sentience, becoming an assistant. Think of it like a mage's familiar or a ranger's animal companion, immensely helpful. The quest reward card, Magic Patterned Amethyst, was perfect for that, so he decided to hatch the servant first. After Jerry left for his job at the pharmacy, Ted went down to the Leaky Cauldron's basement. The place had become Ted and Jerry's secret holiday base, where they experimented with magical practices. Ted had earned the right to use it before school started by agreeing to clean the basement and clear out the secondhand clutter. He placed the Magic Patterned Amethyst card in his mind and concentrated. In the next instant, a translucent purple crystal with red spiderweb patterns appeared in his hand. It was about the size of a goose egg, a faceted column of deep purple with dark crimson magical veining, gorgeous and radiating a distinct, purposeful magic. If it were used for enchantments, it would be an excellent component. Ted set it on the table, cupped his hands, closed his eyes, and focused his spirit. Many mind mage abilities are remarkably convenient. They don't need elaborate rituals or magic circles. In the empty, 100-square-meter basement, a faint breeze rose. Strange, crisp tapping sounds began. The table shuddered slightly, and a soft light flowed from Ted's palms. 3 minutes later, he opened his eyes and saw no obvious change in the crystal. Did it fail? He wondered. Ha! Just kidding. It succeeded. The crystal sprouted 6 spider-like legs and scuttled in excited circles across the table. Woohoo! I'm born. It had no mouth, but it could make noises by vibrating the air. Stop! Ted hurried to calm it, worried it might topple and shatter. The spirit crystal servant obediently stopped and bounced up to him. My dear master, what are your commands? It asked in a slick, overly enthusiastic tone. So, I succeeded? Are you my spirit crystal servant? Ted asked. Undoubtedly, I am your spirit crystal servant, a part of you, a limb not attached to your body, a remote hand, a tireless eye. It babbled on, a non-stop chatterbox. All right, I get it. No need to keep going. Ted rubbed his temple. He hadn't expected such loquaciousness. What part of me did this thing inherit? Thank you for the compliment. Thanks to you, the crystal replied, swaying. Do you have a name? You must give me one. Gold Medal Master? You should probably think again. Fine. You've got red spider webs all over you. I'll call you Parker. Yes, Master. Parker has a name. Hatching Parker brought immediate concrete benefits. Ted's attributes rose. +2 intelligence, +2 perception, +3 spirit. Parker also served as an extra psionic reservoir, increasing Ted's psionic limit by 20%. Because the materials he'd used were so good, Parker's abilities were stronger than average, giving him a lot of practical feedback. A spirit crystal servant is like an external processor for a mind mage. Ted could use his mind power through it remotely, which was far more convenient than relying on Ansu. It could also use some of his mind power itself, and as Ted's mind mage level rose, Parker might eventually learn to fly or teleport. Ted thought the whole thing resembled Ravenclaw's old mind magic, splitting and replicating a portion of the mind into a pseudo-clone. It was a pity Ravenclaw had collapsed and that such knowledge had been lost for centuries. Meanwhile, Xian was growing quickly. Wizards have a lot of secondhand junk. Almost every day, dozens to hundreds of items were posted, with 20 to 30 transactions typical. Sometimes people sold unwanted things, sometimes they bought items they needed, and sometimes they left requests for hard-to-find stuff. Many barters took place on Xian. Ted usually acted as guarantor, appraising items, verifying information, and ensuring accuracy. He didn't force trades, he just charged an appraisal fee. In the first week of the holidays, the platform performed well. Ted earned roughly 11 galleons, mostly from appraisal fees, while Jerry's 2 part-time jobs brought in less than 2 galleons a week. Ted's reputation for appraising had started to spread. A few unsure sellers came to him to have items evaluated. On the day they declared a break for Xian, Jerry had the day off, and Ted posted a message giving the platform a day's rest. Ted holed up in the leaky cauldron basement to study, mostly magic from the D&D world. Azeroth combat spells tended to cause too much commotion. He was wary of accidentally leveling a pub. He remembered when he'd tried to research Firestorm at school. The first attempt after 2 days of study failed and nearly set an abandoned classroom on fire. He was lucky the classroom had been silenced and contained, otherwise it would have been a disaster. He had to pour out over a dozen aguamenti and cast multiple freezing spells to put out the flames, then used more than 30 reparo spells to restore the room. That sobered him. His theoretical foundation and spell control weren't yet solid, and his spell level wasn't high enough to handle extremely dangerous magics. Fine, if he couldn't learn them safely, he wouldn't try. So in the basement, he limited himself to lower-risk spells. When he needed a break from study, he answered letters. In a week, almost all his friends had written back. Hermione's letter was neat and precise, like beautifully written script. She complained about being bored and frustrated at not being able to research or use magic. Ron's was messy and casual, like careless cursive with letters sometimes running together. He grumbled that Fred and George had carted all the junk away and chided Ted for not telling him about Xian sooner. Neville wrote haltingly, with many corrections. He missed school and was indecisive about a lot, but looked forward to the new term. Hagrid's letter was practically illegible. A third of it was chicken scratch, but Ted gleaned that Fluffy, the 3-headed dog, had been sent back to Greece through someone Dumbledore arranged. As for Harry, there was no letter from her. She'd been busy shopping in Diagon Alley, and true to form, Ted and Jerry had already bumped into her 4 times that week. On July 1st, the morning after that idle day, Ted woke up and the system pinged. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge triggered. 106. Windfall. Hair color recipe. Ding talent. Otherworld knowledge activated. Discovered. Official Trainer Pokemon Cultivation Manual. Green. Official Trainer Pokemon Cultivation Manual. Documented the cultivation plans and procedures an official Pokemon trainer used for raising Pokemon. It required 300 experience points to exchange. The card had a green frame and showed a red and white ball beneath images of creatures. Crows, dogs, a Meow Meow, mushroom-headed Pokemon, and a Charizard. Ted stared at it, stunned. What had slipped into his otherworld knowledge this time? What on earth was a Pokemon? Exchange it, exchange it. I have to see what this is, he blurted. 300 experience points were only what he could earn in 3 or 4 days. Affordable. A flood of information poured into Ted's head. Pokemon classifications, feeding, cultivation, combat, an overview of everything. But the actual list of Pokemon was small. There were only 7 specific cultivation plans. It seemed an official trainer was hardly more advanced than a novice, only just stepping into professional combat. The recorded trainer's perspective sounded like that of someone in his late 30s. Ordinary, never a champion, the kind of middling trainer most people were. Compared to Ash and the champions, this was embarrassing. It felt like an ordinary game player who'd played longer but never reached the world stage. Still, that was the real majority. The 7 Pokemon named in the manual were Murkrow, Arcanine, Meow Meow, Amoonguss, Foongus, Tangrowth, and Charizard. Charizard was probably the highest evolution in the list. Ted scratched his head. Pokemon taxonomy was unfamiliar to him. Was Charizard an evolution of Charmander? He only had some vague recollections. Pikachu, Bulbasaur, Blastoise, Magikarp, names he'd heard. Ted now had a set of cultivation methods and techniques, but where would he find Pokemon? Ash had Professor Oak. He could ask Hagrid. Wait, Pokemon, magical beasts. What if the methods for cultivating Pokemon could be adapted to magical beasts? Or could certain magical beasts be modified into Pokemon-like creatures? Professor Quirrell and Hagrid would be fascinated by that line of inquiry. Ted savored the Pokemon knowledge, and the more he thought about it, the more exciting it became. Professor Quirrell had bequeathed precious notes to Ted before he died. Ted's studies in magical creatures and bloodline modification had jumped tremendously after that bitter tea moment. Combining cultivation and modification knowledge from different worlds felt like a chemical reaction. Of course, as a 12-year-old wizard, he couldn't use most of that advanced knowledge yet. Spellcraft was the foundation of any research in the magic world. Only with solid spellcraft could one branch into extended fields like magical creatures study. That's why Hogwarts kept magical creatures study as an elective only after the 3rd year. At Ted's level, mastering regular spells and basic magic was already plenty. Even when he tried something ambitious like Blaze Storm, the result had only been explosive rather than controlled. The Quirrell notes demanded countless spells and extremely precise magical alterations. This wasn't something you did by grabbing a beast, bleeding it, casting a spell, and calling it a day. The knowledge had to be shelved for now, like a middle schooler discovering nuclear physics and quantum mechanics. Fascinating, but presently unusable. Still, the otherworld knowledge from July wasn't useless, only temporarily so. Life had to continue according to plan. Ted helped Mr. Giggs at the apothecary brewing potions and preparing ingredients, oversaw trades and daily appraisals on the Xianyu website, and studied magic, previewing next year's textbooks and researching spells from Azeroth and the D&D worlds. The Otherworld tomes had been a treasure trove for the past 2 months. He could study them for another year at least. Jerry had become efficient at handling ingredients and interacting with curious wizards who visited the Xianyu website, recording their requests neatly. One day, while Ted was brewing a potion called Skin Moisturizing Oil, he noticed something odd. Skin Moisturizing Oil was a purified ointment potion, a primary cosmetic base that Madame Purnell's beauty shop used to make finished beauty products. Madame Purnell and Mr. Giggs had been classmates and remained on good terms, so Giggs handled her business. Madame Purnell's shop offered services like mole removal, freckle fading, scar removal, and wart extraction. She even went to a Muggle beauty salon for research. Back to Ted's discovery. While brewing the oil, a scrap of material called purple sorrel leaf accidentally fell into the cauldron and reacted with the dog carp oil. The purple sorrel, originally dark red, turned an intensely vivid bright purple. Ted's batch failed. He'd wasted 13 silver sickles worth of materials. When he cleaned up, though, he noticed the purple pigment clung stubbornly. It couldn't be removed with ordinary Accio. After 5 or 6 tests, he developed a counter potion using sour grass and dog carp oil to remove the stain. The accident was costly, but the purple was striking. Bright, anime-like purple hair color. "Can this dye hair?" Ted murmured, staring at the small basin of purple salve. Over the next few days, he experimented, using other alchemical formulas from the Otherworld knowledge, especially notes from Sule Pao Bubble Alchemy Recipe Notes Green, and with Mr. Giggs's suggestions, Ted spent 5 days on research and developed a first-generation product, a hair dye spray. "Let's call it Bright Purple, Handsome Guy Hair Dye," he laughed, delighted. Packaging was a purple frosted glass bottle with a spray nozzle ordered from a Muggle factory. A few sprays would dye hair bright purple in seconds. Dosage and technique could slightly shift the shade. The color wouldn't come off with ordinary spells unless a matching decolorizer was used. Otherwise, the dye lasted about a week and then faded. A fist-sized bottle had about 15 uses, and excluding labor, cost about 15 silver sickles to make. Labor wasn't expensive. Production was simple and required little skill, and one batch yielded a large pot, enough to fill hundreds of bottles. Ding! After long research and experimentation, you invented a new potion formula, Handsome Guy Hair Dye, Purple. Gained 880 experience. The The system recognized it. Proud, Ted had Mr. Giggs contact Madame Purnell. She was very interested and excited after trying it. After bargaining, Ted sold the formula for 450 galleons and signed a 5-year exclusive rights contract. Ted felt she'd been generous. Only 5 years? Capitalists in other worlds enjoyed longer terms. Through their dealings, Ted suspected Madame Purnell might feel something more than friendship for Mr. Giggs, perhaps more than mere classmates. Ted chuckled inwardly. Mr. Giggs, don't dilly-dally. Don't let your chance pass. The 450 galleons greatly enlarged Ted's small treasury. Combined with gold converted from the pseudo-philosopher's stone that month, his working capital had reached 500 galleons. Finally, he could go shopping. For a long time, he'd appraised desirable items he couldn't afford. Now he had funds to buy them. Another month slipped by. The Xianyu website had settled into a steady rhythm. 30 to 40 second-hand items listed or sold each day, about 200 items total. In a small, sparsely populated wizarding community, rapid growth was unlikely. The site had served its purpose, putting an idea into practice and allowing Ted to observe the strange and wonderful things of the magic world. Most importantly, his appraisal skill had improved dramatically after weeks of intensive use. Items that once yielded only vague hints now revealed most of their information. Yesterday, he'd appraised an ancestral item for a pure-blood wizard, an old red-quality heirloom passed down for over 300 years. After an accident that cost the owner his father, much of the item's history had been lost. Through repeated appraisals, Ted uncovered most of its information and functions, and even found taboos and usage methods. It was a high-end magical item, and the previous owner had consulted many experts without success. Ted's work earned him some fame. Rumors about that kid with appraisal talent spread among local wizards, and the fresh novelty of the Xianyu website became dinner-table talk for several families. The magic world updated slowly. Long lifespans and isolation kept things static, but a lively new marketplace like Xianyu website stirred interest. Wizards flocked to Diagon Alley just to see. Sometimes, when Ted presided over a sale or an appraisal with wizards 3 deep around him, watching eagerly, he felt as if he were at an old-fashioned stock exchange, especially when bidding started. 107. 4th level Scion. Sir, based on my appraisal, this stone shows some magical resonance. It looks like a raw gem ore with an astral affinity. I'm afraid I don't know its official name or function, Ted said. The customer's expression hardened. He looked to be in his 40s, trying desperately to keep up appearances despite his worn, outdated clothes. He had the air of a scion from a fallen pure-blood house, ornate garments, but from an older fashion and threadbare at the edges. He'd come to Ted claiming the stone was an heirloom, asking Ted to authenticate it and list it for sale on the Xianyu website. His posture and pleading were exactly like a once-important family trying to pawn off relics to survive. Ted's appraisal, however, was not what the man wanted to hear. The stone was an artificial magic gem, an alchemical forgery meant to imitate a true North American natstone, a naturally astral gem used in making special magical items. The fake looked better on the surface, but its effect was inferior and unstable. According to Ted's read, its astral magic would fade completely in at most 3 months, leaving the gem useless. If that were passed off as genuine raw ore on Xianyu, reputations would be ruined. Ted kept his expression sheepish and apologetic, the perfect performance of an inexperienced young wizard. Sir, my abilities are limited. I couldn't fully verify everything about this stone, so I can't vouch for it. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. He refused to lie for the man. No matter how the customer protested, Ted remained apologetic until the man left, furious, clutching his gem. A black crow rose silently from the street and glided along the eaves, following the man. He wandered through a few shops and finally disappeared down Nocturne Alley, beneath a sign that read Borgin and Burke's. Perched on the eaves, Ansu dropped a translucent amethyst crystal from its back. The crystal extended 6-jointed legs, clung to the wall, and began to climb. Ted's spirit crystal servant, Parker, scuttled like a spider, its form blurring and simulating the surroundings. From the street, nothing moving on the wall could be seen. Chameleon's skin, a mind power Ted had recently learned, let Parker blend into its environment and avoid detection. It lacked the obvious magical fluctuations of an illusion spell, making it effective against those skilled at sensing magic, though it required the user to remain still. From a distance, Ted projected his spirit energy into Parker, sharing its senses as it crept to the shop window to eavesdrop. Inside were the man and a gaunt, middle-aged proprietor who was casually polishing a skull-shaped bowl, Caractacus, the current owner of Borgin and Burke's. The shop's name belonged to one of the 28 sacred pure-blood families in Britain. Its history, infamously, included a young Tom Riddle who'd once worked there before his more dramatic transformations. "That little wizard is very cautious," the man complained. "He didn't fall for it." Caractacus glanced up. "Tell me what happened. How did he appraise it, and what did he say?" After the man recited his exchange with Ted, Caractacus nodded slowly. "Let it go." "Just let it go?" the man huffed, reluctant to drop it. "It's not worth the trouble," Caractacus said, masking his unease. "If he from the Muggle orphanage saw through it, it's useless to pursue. That Xianyu business affects only second-hand shops. Nothing for me." Under his breath, he muttered, "Are all the little wizards from Muggle orphanages so troublesome?" The memory of the upheaval in the British wizarding world a decade ago still made him wary. Better not to press this with that boy. Through Parker, Ted learned who had tried to con him, and, in a way, how the shop's reputation and old connections had worked in his favor. He hadn't expected such petty hostility directed at his little stall. Someone had even sent an agent to test him. Ted filed the slight away in his mind. He would remember this. A month later, most things had settled. Jerry went home to rest, and Ted found himself alone in the basement, staring at his experience pool. 11,054 points. He'd been saving, but now it was time to spend. Two clear options sat before him. He could upgrade to a level 5 wizard, which required 10,000 experience points, 9,000 after his study god, Purple, talent reduced the cost. That would leave him with barely any experience, though August was close and new knowledge would become available soon. The other path was to invest in Mind Mage. Taking Mind Mage from level 2 to level 4 required 3,000 plus 6,000, 9,000 total, again reduced by 10% to 8,100 because of his talent. Level 4 of Mind Mage also came with a guaranteed talent draw. Ted decided quickly. His magical foundation felt shaky. Rushing his wizard level higher might overwhelm him. Mind power was crucial, and a higher Mind Mage level would unlock more control and a helpful talent. He spent the experience. The surge was immediate. Small objects rattled and some floated as a vast, indescribable power erupted from his head like a field of starlight. For 3 minutes, the basement trembled under the force. Then the phenomena subsided, and Ted floated slowly back down. Careless, he scolded himself. He'd been thinking only about upgrading his wizard level too fast. He'd forgotten mind power would react the same way. Jumping 2 Mind Mage levels at once nearly overturned the room. His mind power was now too active, more than he had yet mastered. When he reached for the table to steady himself, his spirit energy nudged it, making it creak and slide 20 centimeters. 2 system chimes sounded in quick succession. Ding. Your Mind Mage profession has been upgraded. Current level, Mind Mage 3. You have gained 1 attribute point and +1 mind power. Ding. Your Mind Mage profession has been upgraded. Current level, Mind Mage 4. You have gained 1 attribute point, +1 mind power, and 1 talent draw. Ted poured both attribute points into spirit to help rein in the flood of spirit energy. His mind power shot to level 5, leaving him with a heady, almost intoxicating sense of capability that he knew was an illusion until he learned to control it. System, draw talent, he commanded. Talent, Diane Yang's Pro Training Cliff Purple, activated. Chapter 108, Talent Card. System, extract talent. As soon as Ted spoke, 3 talent cards unfurled in his mind. The first showed a person glowing from head to toe as swords and weapons glanced harmlessly off them. Psionic Skin, blue, talent card. Your skin has adapted to psionic energy and evolved psionic protection. As long as your psionic energy is not depleted, your skin can resist ordinary and some abnormal damage. The second card pictured a person with a crystalline vertical eye on their forehead, shining with light. Forehead eye, blue, talent card. Long-term convergence of psionic energy has formed a crystal eye on your forehead. The crystal eye will greatly enhance your perception and boost related psionic abilities. The third card showed someone speaking or singing, with musical notes streaming from their mouth. People and animals clustered around, listening raptly. Sound of Heart, talent card. Psionic energy makes your voice incredibly moving. Whether speaking, singing, or even making simple noises, you can deeply touch others and inspire empathy. Psionic abilities related to sound and language are greatly enhanced. Your words and songs can easily move people's hearts. There was no real choice to make. The first talent was tempting. A permanent stone skin would be useful, but it didn't solve the real problem. A wizard who got hit by a killing curse wasn't saved by thick skin. The second talent was out of the question. A crystal eye on your forehead would make you stick out like a sore thumb. This world wasn't one where a single person could tower above everyone else without paying a price for being different. The red talent, though, felt tailor-made for Ted. As a mind mage, he already excelled at persuasion. Combine that with the subtle influence of charm art and his harmless, likable appearance, and he had quickly built Xianyu website in Diagon Alley. With Sound of Heart, he could charm people with a single conversation. Getting a good first impression would become effortless. A future run for Minister of Magic would be far less of a stretch. If he couldn't win after 30, well, that would be a failure indeed. A good horse is in its legs, a good person is in their mouth, and his mouth could be the best asset. Ted accepted the red talent card. Afterward, he locked himself in the basement for 2 days straight, honing his psionic control until he could handle his power without blowing up a water cup, levitating the water, or accidentally evaporating it just by picking it up. Psionic energy was like extra senses and limbs. When it suddenly amplified, it could get out of control. He finally adapted. What finally dragged him out was a letter. On the last day of July, the little wizards were meeting in Diagon Alley. Hermione practically flew out of the car, waving to her father, then ran for the leaky cauldron. Mr. Granger watched his daughter dash toward a wall and disappear into it, then shook his head, helpless, and drove off. In those few seconds, he had already begun worrying if he'd locked the front door. A muggle-repelling charm kept him outside the magical world, and his daughter was living in a world he couldn't enter. All he could do was hope she'd be happy. Hermione, caught up in the excitement of seeing her friends, didn't notice the larger worries adulthood would bring. Those were troubles for later. She'd spent over a month unable to use magic at home and unable to receive the daily profit, learning about the wizarding world only through letters. She was about to burst. Finally getting to Diagon Alley, she wanted to cast spells at will. More than that, she was desperate to see Ted. She'd heard he and Jerry had opened a stall in Diagon Alley, launched Xianyu website, and were brokering second-hand goods. She'd missed him and needed his spark to get back into studying. At the leaky cauldron, she approached the bar and, summoning courage, asked the stern-faced barkeep, "Hello, I'm looking for Ted Epiphany. Does he live here?" Old Tom's harsh face broke into a laugh. "Ha ha ha, yes, he lives here. There's only one Ted here," he bellowed to the customers. "That's right, little Ted, the appraisal expert. He's little Ted of Xianyu. I call him the strongest appraising little wizard." The regulars hooted and laughed. Ted's Xianyu website had become a source of endless amusement. The wizarding community produced its share of oddities, and people brought the strangest items for appraisal. Just 2 days earlier, Ted had been asked to authenticate a fully automatic, magically powered, self-comforting rod-shaped device made from unknown animal horn, rare minerals, and goblin silver. Material-wise, it would cost 30 or 40 galleons, whether vulgar or ingenious depended on your eye, but the buyer insisted Ted provide a certificate guaranteeing it worked. The bar regulars had been talking about it ever since. A small commotion by the wall announced a familiar black bird. Ansu, perched and watching, flew over in a flurry. "Hermione! It's Hermione! Caw, caw! Follow me! Caw, caw!" he squawked. "Follow it," Old Tom said to Hermione, who was still blushing at the patron's teasing. "It'll take you to Ted." Hermione followed Ansu down to the basement. Ted looked up from his work and smiled when the door opened. He hadn't expected it to have been so long, and he'd missed her. "Hermione! Ted! Have you been revising your textbooks recently? She asked, more teasing than accusatory. How about we talk about something else first? He replied, a little flustered. You haven't been studying, have you? Then this year I'll be top of the class, Hermione declared, puffing up with pride. She looked at Ted oddly for a moment. His voice sounded unusually pleasant. She thought to herself, that's it. I'll be first this year. If you can keep talking like that, I can listen all day. Hermione beamed at Ted's 2 sentences. He pulled her down onto a stool, offered her some snacks, and launched into the story of how he and Jerry had set up shop in Diagon Alley. Hermione listened, eyes shining with envy as he talked on and on. How she wished she could live in Diagon Alley. She had gone away with her parents for a week in the summer. The rest of the time she was stuck near home. The amusement parks, the libraries, everything that used to thrill her now felt dull. She wanted magic. She wanted it so badly. Soon it was time for their appointment with Neville, Ron, and the others. Ted led Hermione into the Leaky Cauldron's main room, and they waited at a small round table. A moment later, a green flame flared in the fireplace, and a red-haired boy stepped out. Hey, Ron, over here, Ted waved. Ha! Ted! Hermione! Finally! There you two are! Ron was delighted. He was glad to see friends he hadn't seen in ages, and he was relieved he hadn't flewed to the wrong place. Getting the wrong fireplace was just like getting on the wrong bus. I heard you started a business in Diagon Alley? Tell me about it. He sat down and immediately demanded Ted explain the Xianyu website. The Weasley twins had apparently made a fortune over the holidays because of it, and Ron was green with envy. The idea that even useless junk from a storeroom could be traded for money fascinated him. Before Ted could start, a few nearby pub-goers chimed in, eager to tell Ron about the marvelous, automatic, magically assisted device. Ted quickly shepherded his friends down to the cellar, determined they wouldn't be corrupted by the gossipy lot above. Neville arrived soon after through the flue. As the boy who lived, well, in many circles he was known and recognized, and a cluster of people immediately swarmed him to make conversation. Ted, having received a reminder from Ansu, led Hermione and the others to Neville's rescue. Only when they'd escaped the crowd and reached the yard did Neville visibly relax. You scared me to death. Should I have worn a hat? Neville muttered. You should have waved at them. Ron grinned, a tiny bit jealous. He liked the idea of being the center of attention. Ted went to fetch Jerry, who had been keeping the stall. A temporarily closed sign hung over the Xianyu office desk, and outside the apothecary, the group noticed a banner advertising the site. Too many two-faced people? True or false, Xianyu will tell. Last month, first 20 customers each day get 20% off appraisal fees. Merlin's floral underpants. What kind of magical advertisement is that? Hermione murmured, half amused, half curious. I want something appraised too. Led by Ted, the friends sat in front of an ice cream shop and each ordered a large cone. They began complaining about their holidays. Ron and Hermione both declared theirs boring. Neville complained that his had been specially supervised by his family and had left him even more awkward than before. Only Ted and Jerry had colorful stories to tell. I'm jealous, Neville sighed. I wish I could. Oh, I can't. I get nervous when there are too many people. I just can't do it. Ted and Hermione tried to reassure him. He'd gain confidence with practice. Neville shrugged. Once he accepted his own weaknesses, he said he felt almost invincible. Then he remembered something, and his face clouded. Oh, by the way, over the holiday I ran into something really terrifying. What happened? Ron asked, chattering his teeth as he bit into his ice cream. Neville made a miserable face. There was a house elf I'd never seen before. It kept bothering me and making threats. Ted's ears pricked up. The mention of a strange house elf tugged at a memory from the original story. Could such a change even have still left Dobby alone? Neville went on. Just yesterday, it showed up when I was in the toilet and started saying I'd drop out of school, that there was a big conspiracy waiting for me. It frightened me so much. He stopped, eyes wide. He'd been practicing a spell outside and gone to water a bush when the house elf had suddenly appeared behind him. Imagine, a tiny thing about a meter tall, with eyes like tennis balls, a small inverted triangular face, a long nose, long ears flopping to the sides, barefoot in a torn pillowcase, muttering about curses and conspiracies. suddenly right behind you while well, you get the idea. Neville nearly wet himself. A house elf? Not everyone has one, do they? Do you know who it belongs to? Ron asked. No, no, Neville protested. At that moment, someone called from a distance. Hermione, Ted, Neville, Jerry. They turned and saw Harry approaching, accompanied by Sirius and his wife. After a few words with the couple, Harry strode over. Ha, we meet again. How was your holiday? She pulled out a chair, sat down, and without ceremony, took a big bite of Hermione's ice cream. Boss, give me a large vanilla one too, she demanded, grinning. Sirius watched his daughter laughing with friends from a short distance away, a mix of nostalgia and a little sadness washing over him. She had grown up and didn't like staying at home anymore. That was disconcerting. Ms. Olivia, standing next to him, slipped her arm through his to comfort him. She's grown up now, Olivia murmured. She'll have her own life, don't worry. Harry's arrival made them all temporarily forget the intrusive house elf. They finished their ice cream and then headed to the leaky cauldron. Earlier, they had agreed in a letter to visit the Weasleys today. Aunt Molly had wanted Ted and Jerry to come over during the first year, and now she'd invited everyone to take advantage of the holiday. They planned to flew to the burrow. Ron went first, standing before the fireplace with a deep breath and pinching a pinch of flu powder. Remember, enunciate clearly, he reminded them. He tossed the powder into the flames. They turned green as he shouted, "The burrow." A flash of green swallowed him, and he was gone. Neville whispered, "The burrow," under his breath several times, anxious about saying it wrong. One by one, they stepped forward. After Neville went, only Ted and Hermione remained. Ted saw Hermione's nervousness and took her hand. "Let's go together," he said, and they jumped in together. The burrow. The green flames rose and their bodies shook, and in a few seconds it was over. The flame died down and they were somewhere else entirely. "Come out quickly. The fireplace is full of ash," Aunt Molly chided, waving something like a feather duster over Ted and Hermione. The dust vanished from their clothes instantly. Welcome to the burrow, Ted and Hermione." Molly hugged them both, and everything went smoothly. Alongside the friends were the Weasley children, Peggy, the twins, Ginny, and Mr. Weasley. There were 10 children in the house now. The burrow hadn't been this lively in years. 110. Guest room. "Children, we have 2 hours until lunch. Feel free to wander about before then and show our guests around," Aunt Molly said, then fixed the twins with a look. "No trouble. George? Fred?" "Mom, I'm Fred." "I'm George." Aunt Molly didn't even glance at them. "It doesn't matter who is who. If either of you causes trouble, I'll hit both of you." The boys spread their hands in mock surrender. The twins had wanted to take Ted to their secret hideout, their warehouse base, to talk about magic props and buying and selling second-hand goods. In the last month, they'd made 7 or 8 galleons by flogging useless things from around the house, and their spirits were high. But Mr. Weasley had already drawn Ted aside and started peppering him with questions about Muggle technology, televisions in particular. Ted had tried to explain patiently, but Mr. Weasley was utterly baffled. "Mr. Weasley," Ted said, "Muggle technology is progressive and systematic. There's so much knowledge involved in televisions, I couldn't explain everything. Maybe start with something simpler, like radios. I've heard someone in the magical community is working on those." That was exactly Mr. Weasley's sort of thing. Don't forget his job at the Ministry, head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. Even if he only had one direct subordinate, anything to do with enchanted radios or modified devices was his territory. "My turn," he thought, and launched into a long, enthusiastic conversation with Ted about whether magically altered radios could become common, how they might work, and the legal questions they raised. He thanked Ted for the information more than once, saying it would help him draft regulations. He even lowered his voice to Ted and confided, "Last time we talked about cars, I've already modified mine. I'll show you when I get a moment." "It's brilliant." Mr. Weasley was in his element, and he clearly wanted to talk more to this young man. Ted glanced toward the kitchen where Aunt Molly was directing pots and pans and nodded to himself. "You write the laws," he thought. "You decide." Out in the yard, the others were busy catching garden gnomes. When they saw Ted freed from Mr. Weasley's questioning, they called him over. Ron plunged his arm into a gnome-filled hole and hauled something up that was slightly larger than a potato. Its head was huge and lumpy compared to its body, like a distorted spud, with rough, ugly features and bright, dim but eager eyes. Seeing Ron wind up to toss it, Ted hurried forward. "Wait, Ron, let me see. I've never seen one like this." Ron handed it over. "All right, but be careful. They bite." Ted held its head, feeling it thrash, and examined it. It had limbs and a face, but didn't look very bright. "Are these potato sprites?" he asked. "Gnomes, potato sprites, earth rats. Lots of names," George said. "They dig holes in the garden and chew the roots out of things. Mum hates them, but Dad won't let us kill them. We just chuck them as far away as we can and hope they don't find their way back." Fred snorted. "Doesn't do much good. Maybe we should get a dirt-digging ferret. Those things eat potato sprites." Ted thought for a moment. The creature seemed to have magic, but it was very weak, more like an elemental or a lesser house spirit than a normal animal. He poked it and asked, "Do they have sexes?" The question stumped everyone. After some poking and prodding, there were no obvious sex characteristics. That fit Ted's hunch. These things weren't made by ordinary reproduction. Like many magical creatures, they were born of magic. If it weren't for the Weasleys' presence and activity in the garden, these potato sprites wouldn't be there at all. Lunch was abundant and homely. No grand roast, but everything was delicious home cooking. Eating together made the food even better, and Aunt Molly kept ladling more and more on their plates until Jerry couldn't stop hiccuping. During the meal, Mr. Weasley brought up his work. Recently, wizards living in remote areas had been attacked by strange, otherworldly monsters. One elderly wizard had even died. No one knew the culprit. People were understandably alarmed, and some of the more isolated families were thinking of moving. The ministry had to respond, and Mr. Weasley had been called in to help confiscate illegal dark artifacts. "Yesterday we raided 9 houses." "9!" he said, delighted. "Mundungus Fletcher, old scoundrel, tried to jinx me when my back was turned. In a couple of days I'm taking people to raid Malfoy's." He said Malfoy with obvious glee. It was an opportunity to stick it to an old rival. But Ted's mind lingered on the news of the mysterious creature attacking remote wizards. Otherworldly implied something unknown and uncatalogued. That was worrying. After lunch, Ron took Neville, Ted, and Jerry upstairs to see his room and rest, while Hermione and Harry went to Ginny's. Ginny would be going to Hogwarts that September. She squealed when she first saw Neville, blushing bright red and dashing away, then peeking back a moment later. Neville's face went beetroot. He didn't know whether to laugh or hide. The Burrow wasn't a pretty house, but it was roomy, built by magic rather than common architectural sense. The place expanded up and out as needed. The exterior paid no mind to mechanical logic. Ron's room wasn't handsome, but it was big and could be arranged however he liked. Quidditch posters, a fish tank with a frog that had little antennae, shelves cluttered with toys and knickknacks. "It's pretty ordinary, right?" Ron asked, a little self-conscious. Ted put an arm around his shoulders. "Ron, don't worry. You aren't showing off to me. I don't even have my own room." Jerry chimed in. "My room only holds a bed, a table, and a chair. This is brilliant, honestly." Neville murmured, "I haven't got any toys. I don't have any toys at all. I'm jealous." Ron brightened and apologized, and the small pang of inferiority he had felt faded. In Ginny's room, she sat quietly asking Harry about Hogwarts, mostly about Neville and the sorting. The two girls exchanged a meaningful look. Harry said solemnly, "There's a test in the sorting. You have to pass it. It's a difficult test." Hermione frowned. "I don't like to think about what happened last time." Harry agreed. "It was dangerous. I don't know if I could do it again." Ginny was nearly in tears from being frightened and flattered at once, and Harry and Hermione both hastened to reassure her. "We didn't mean to scare you," Hermione said. "After all, it's one of Hogwarts' traditions." They settled in with stories and explanations until the house grew sleepy with the afternoon sun and the children's chatter. 111. August Knowledge. After dinner, Ted went to the Weasley twins' secret hideout. They planned to make something interesting and also to check their relative's warehouse for old items they could help dispose of. The twins talked about a wealthy Weasley relative, Aunt Muriel Prewitt, Molly's aunt. Because Molly and Arthur had eloped, neither of them had much support from their families. Aunt Muriel, who inherited the wealth of the pure-blood Prewett line, came to the burrow every Christmas and had a fairly close relationship with them. Her family was very rich, owning a priceless goblin diadem and a large house. Molly had been left with only an old watch. Aunt Muriel had no descendants, so her assets would eventually go to Molly and her children. George shrugged. Of course, we might have lost our inheritance rights. Fred chuckled. Maybe it's because we slid a farting pouch under her cushion that one time. The twins laughed uproariously, not the least bit put out. Aunt Muriel had never liked Mr. Weasley much. Arthur and Molly had eloped after all, and although she'd accepted the marriage later, the twins' mischief had never endeared them to her. She often scolded them in her sharp, old-fashioned way. The twins, for their part, retaliated. At that moment, they were already brainstorming prank toys, full of ideas, but lacking the knowledge to realize them. Ted gave them plenty of practical advice, especially about prank suites. After half a holiday spent brewing potions, he was already something of a potions expert. I've made a decision that goes against my ancestors, Ted said. I still think you should study hard at Hogwarts. To make some of your ideas real, it's not something ordinary spells or potions can achieve. Like that candy that causes nosebleeds, George said. That would involve some kind of bleeding potion, very advanced. Merlin's bitter tea, Fred muttered, half laughing. Lads, pranks need brains, Ted said. They all grinned. In the afternoon, they lay in the sun and played on a nearby hillside. Because of the potato spirit incident, Ted found himself thinking about house elves and asked everyone what they knew. Most didn't know much. Ron and the others only knew that only the oldest, most prominent families had house elves. Peggy, however, knew a lot more. She was a fifth-year academic ace and head girl. With a pastry in hand, she explained, from what I understand, house elves are tied to a dwelling. The more ancient and grand the house, the more likely it is to have a house elf. Hogwarts has well over 100, almost half the number of students. They take care of nearly all the behind-the-scenes work there. Born because of a house? Hermione's eyes went wide. Peggy nodded. I've never heard of house elves marrying. They don't seem to be born naturally like people. It's more like they're brought into being by the house's magic. In a few decades, the burrow might even produce its own house elf if the family stays long enough. So if they don't have a house to attach to, their magic and life would fade? Ted asked. That seems likely, Peggy agreed. From the moment they're bound, it's as if they've signed a deep contract with their household. Only when the owner gives them clothes does that contract break. Hermione was shaken. With her muggle-born outlook, she found the idea hard to accept. This sounded unbearably like a form of slavery. She looked at Ted, searching for guidance. Ted met her gaze and said quietly, Hermione, you don't have to fixate on how they came to be. If a house elf is kind, treat them kindly. If they're hostile, put them in their place with magic. Whether they were born that way or bound that way doesn't change how we should act. It's like the difference between pure blood and muggle-born. It's not something that changes how we treat people. Hermione nodded slowly, pulling herself out of her blankness. As the sun began to set, everyone prepared to head home. Neville and Harry went straight through the fireplace, while Ted and a couple of others returned to the leaky cauldron. Jerry, because of his ears, avoided appearing in the muggle world, so Ted accompanied Hermione to her car. Mr. Granger's car was already waiting. Hermione, see you when Hogwarts starts, Ted waved. Make sure Ansu sends me letters, Hermione called back, waving. Okay, Mr. Granger, next time for sure, Ted replied as Mr. Granger waved him off. On the 1st of August, as soon as Ted opened his eyes, a chime sounded in his head. Ding. Talent, otherworld knowledge triggered, discovered, crafting specialization book. The crafting specialization book, green, contained the basic understanding and insights of an old, low-level magic user into crafting. It required 320 experience to exchange. Ted's eyes lit up with excitement. Jerry, I'm heading to the basement. You go to Mr. Giggs's after breakfast. Don't wait for me, he said as he dressed. Jerry's round ears twitched from under the blanket. He'd heard, but he wanted to lie a little longer. Ted went down to the basement and immediately traded for the knowledge. He stood still for several minutes, then sat and began to read through it carefully. The book was surprisingly useful. Crafting covered a huge range: potions, magical weapons and armor, enchanted artifacts, staffs, wands, rings, and even spell scrolls. In a D&D style system, spell scrolls were indispensable. Prepare one ahead of time, and you could activate it in a pinch, and sometimes those who met the requirements could even learn the spell from the scroll. They weren't cheap. Many magic users made money copying scrolls and then used that income to buy higher-level scrolls. Ted had seen many strange, high-end magic items over the past month and had never understood how they worked. The idea that he might be able to make such things himself thrilled him. Crafting, in effect, fell under alchemy. Through quests and the pseudo-philosopher's stone, he'd haphazardly bumped his alchemy to level 1 without formally studying it. Alchemy wasn't very popular in Britain, but had followers in France, Egypt, and the Arab world. Ted decided to dig up a few books and teach himself properly. The more he read, the more he enjoyed it. It felt a little like the handicraft classes he'd loved as a child. But unlike spell research, crafting cost money. Manufacturing items required materials. Fortunately, the Shanyu website provided cheap supplies: ores, gems, crystals, metals, herbs, and all sorts of odd bits and bobs. Wizards always accumulated strange things they didn't need. Secondhand shops often wouldn't take them because they didn't know what they were, or because the items were too niche. Now, with Shanyu, many wizards used it to trade goods or exchange information. Ted had even had to set up 2 rows of benches and a few tables outside Mr. Giggs's apothecary so those who came to watch could sit. He nearly started selling tea and pumpkin seeds. There weren't many places for wizards to gather and socialize. A spot like that quickly became a social hub. People brought their own stools or transfigured temporary seats and spent whole mornings or afternoons there. Ted noticed some wizards sold things not for profit, but simply to join the fun or share stories, like an old tea house. Grinning at the thought, Ted muttered, "Why don't I start a comedy troupe? Let Ron do the boasting." He dove back into the book, already planning what to make first. 112. Strong Hype. For several days, Ted kept trying to make magical items, with only mediocre results. These weren't the temporarily enchanted trinkets he'd managed before. Those items would lose their power in a few hours or days. Ted was trying to make enduring magical items, the sort that keep their effects for years, like the teapot in the original stories that still nips at people's noses after sitting in a corner for decades, or the opal necklace from Borgin and Burke's that carried a death curse that never faded. Long-lasting enchantments required far more than what Ted had been doing. Most of that craft fell under alchemy, which reached into so many fields, its depth was almost indescribable. Even with a level 2 proficiency, Ted was still a beginner, teaching himself by trial and error. Alchemy had probably appeared too early in his skill progression, too much to learn, too many specializations. Even with a proper teacher, a practitioner could only master a subfield. For an amateur like Ted, progress meant feeling his way forward. He did manage a few small successes: glowing glass beads, ropes that could tie themselves, but their usefulness was limited. He even attempted to create spiritual ashes, trying the Lone Wolf Ashes creation method, green, from the Elden Ring world, and failed. Still, the full process was etched in his mind. Failure meant only that his technique wasn't precise enough. After a handful, a dozen, or dozens of attempts, he would get it. He also tried copying magic scrolls, which turned out to be harder than it sounded. After days of effort, the only scroll he managed to reproduce reliably was the simplest one, Lumos. Scrolls, it turned out, weren't as vital in the wizarding world as in other settings. Spellcasters who relied on innate magic or limited spell slots used scrolls as backups. But wizards in this world could cast at will. Using a wand was simpler and often preferable to unrolling a scroll. Scrolls were useful in special cases, when a wand had been taken, for instance, but even then there were alternative wandless techniques. The interesting discovery for Ted was that scrolls could be used by anyone who had magic in them. Ansu could tear and trigger one. That meant some magical creatures or squibs could also make use of scrolls. While working on scrolls, he also discovered a valuable magical material: the ink of deep-sea squid that loved to dive. This ink appears in magical contracts and in handwritten magic books, and some artists use it for painting. It's an excellent conductor for magic, capable of binding enchantments tightly and preserving them. That's why many advanced spellbooks were precious. Carrying magic in their ink meant they could not be mass-printed. They had to be written by hand. Time flew, and August 10th came. The Hogwarts letter arrived with the supply list for second year. Aside from Miranda Goshawk's standard book of spells, grade 2, 7 of the required books were by Gilderoy Lockhart. Ted, who'd spent enough time freeloading in the bookstore to know the trends, knew Lockhart's books were wildly popular and expensive. His new book this year had sparked rumors of a signing event. They were selling like bestsellers, not textbooks. Ted imagined the Weasleys having to buy 5 sets, 35 books total, and he could picture their faces. Ron wrote later, complaining in a letter, "Is this professor here to teach or to sell books? Our family has to buy 35 books. Ginny also needs robes, a wand, and other things." The pressure wore on Ron. At his age, he shouldn't have to shoulder so much financial worry. The twins had emptied their savings to pitch in over the summer. They'd worked all the holidays, only to be back where they started. Hermione wrote too. She planned to go to Diagon Alley on the 26th to buy textbooks. On the 26th, Ted met an excited Hermione at the Leaky Cauldron, and he, Hermione, and Jerry headed to Diagon Alley. The Weasleys were there too, conspicuous with their red hair. Weasley had lost more hair in the last 10 days, but had somehow scraped together the money. Lockhart's complete new set, plus the required magical me, cost at least 20 galleons per set on the market. 5 sets would be a full 100 galleons. For the not exactly well-off Weasleys, that was a crushing expense. Ted guessed Mr. Weasley had gone to Gringotts to withdraw. In Diagon Alley, the trio ran into Neville and then the Weasleys. Mr. Weasley and others went off to Gringotts to withdraw money, leaving Ron and Ginny behind. Ron asked Ted, "Aren't you going to Gringotts?" Ted shrugged. "I don't trust goblins with my cash. I'll keep mine on me." He didn't even trust the village banks. Ron's face darkened. "So I guess our family won't be saving any time soon." Even before meeting him, Ron already disliked Lockhart. Jerry echoed the feeling. "A full 100 galleons! Damn it!" Ron muttered. Ted clapped Ron on the shoulder and grinned. "I'm not going to let him make a fortune off us. His books have anti-copying charms, sure, but I can use a quick copying quill to transcribe them and rebind the copies." Ron and Jerry's eyes lit up. They didn't need to be told what he meant. Hermione, predictably, was horrified. "How can you even suggest that? That's piracy. It's wrong." "Hermione," Ted said gently, "you have to understand. These required book lists are suspicious. Lockhart is basically using his role as a professor to sell books. That's unethical. If we do something shady in response, who started it?" "It's still wrong," Hermione insisted, torn. "But 100 galleons for textbooks is ridiculous. What are we supposed to do if we genuinely can't afford them?" Ted played diplomat. "If we do make copies, we keep it quiet. Don't flaunt it. And if we end up using pirated books, be grateful to Professor Lockhart in your heart for making it possible," he added with a wink. "Ah, yes, thank Professor Lockhart for my 8 pirated books." Ron snapped sarcastically. Jerry chimed in, mock pious. "I thank Professor Lockhart and his ancestors for 8 generations." Hermione's cheeks flushed with anger. Ted waved his hands to calm her down. "Also, don't let the professor catch you with them. If he spots us using copies in class, he could make life difficult." Word spread quickly. Ron told Ginny and the twins about the plan. They all agreed. They'd ask the family to buy a brand new set for Ginny and say they'd use second-hand ones. They'd claim Ted had stocked some from a second-hand market, an excuse Ted improvised on the spot. Lockhart, meanwhile, was signing books outside Flourish and Blots, already surrounded by people. 2 days earlier, Ted had posted an announcement about temporarily suspending services on his website. Gossiping wizards and witches who'd been looking for something to do now had Lockhart to talk about. They munched and sipped, pointing and criticizing the man who was signing and smiling. Lockhart did have a marketable look, slicked back hair, meticulously arranged golden curls, a smile ready at the slightest praise. The crowd clustered mostly with witches in their 30s and 40s, fans in costume, shrieking with delight at their idol. At that moment, Harry arrived in Diagon Alley with Sirius and his wife. Seeing his friends, he broke away and ran over, making Sirius look a little jealous. A few steps away, Harry called out, loud enough to be heard. "Hey, who's that blonde guy with the fake smile?" "Who? A book peddler," Ron said, lips curled. Jerry and Neville nodded in agreement. Hermione rolled her eyes. To her, anyone taking a professorship deserved respect. She thought of Professors Snape and Quirrell and trailed off. Then something went predictably wrong. The moment Lockhart saw Neville, his eyes lit up. "Aha, Neville! Look who's here!" he crowed. He gave a grand wave to the surrounding crowd. "Everyone, look, the famous boy who lived is here to buy my book, My Magical Me." He seized Neville's wrist, who was trying to back away, and thrust a stack of autographed books into his hands. Neville was surrounded by dozens of onlookers, the man's grip on his arm tight as an iron vise. "Now, master and apprentice, a photo. What a wonderful thing," Lockhart declared, pulling Neville in for a very public hug. A short, energetic fellow resembling a chimpanzee hopped around snapping pictures with a camera. Neville would have preferred a dance with a troll to posing with this golden-haired man. His companions protested loudly. "Let go of Neville. Stop forcing him into this." The crowd buzzed, some amused, some annoyed, while Neville stood there, trapped in Lockhart's embrace, blinking under the too bright attention. 113, the Wizarding Boxing Match. Hermione was incandescent with anger at Lockhart's strong-arm tactics of buying influence and riding on Neville's sudden popularity. "Neville doesn't want this. How can someone be like this?" "Let go of Neville," Harry snapped, sleeves rolled up, ready to let the blonde fraud feel the fist of a Gryffindor. But Ted was faster. He didn't even need to draw his wand. He made a strange small gesture and subtly pointed. Suddenly, a dozen meters away, Lockhart's backside started to smoke. "Fire! He's on fire!" someone shrieked. The middle-aged witches nearby cried out and pointed at Lockhart's smoldering rear like drivers about to crash, panicked and helpless. Lockhart froze, then felt it, a searing pain. He jumped a full meter with a yelp and started slapping his backside frantically. Slap, 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 loud and ridiculous. The more he slapped, the more the thin fabric of his robes took, and open flames licked at him. He'd completely forgotten Neville. The ape-like photographer at his side went berserk, clicking away at the spectacle. Click, click, click. At last, one of Lockhart's admirers pulled out a wand to help, but she was not a competent witch. Spells were cast in an uncoordinated jumble, water-making, a freezing jinx, something that went bang, and instead of dousing the flames, they detonated Lockhart's robes. He emerged from the explosion wearing nothing but white boxers patterned with pink strawberries. For a moment, everyone stared. The crowd gasped. Then the die-hard female fans near him squealed in delight. "Oh my, his undies are so unique. I love them. The pink strawberries match him so well. You don't know how hard he works. He talked to that infernal lady all night." Their loyalty was absurd and blind. Lockhart, however, was mortified. "Ah!" he screamed, grabbed his face and ran. That only inflamed the crowd more. Dozens of admirers and gawkers surged after him, some lifting their skirts or robes, others laughing, chasing and prodding. Chaos erupted like a bullfight. In the confusion, Neville slipped away, robes trailing, and shoved a stack of Lockhart's autograph-filled books into Ron's hands. "Don't buy them," he spat. "Just copy these. We'll all use this set." Ron and Ginny's brothers' smiles returned instantly. Even Hermione, who despised piracy in principle, couldn't bear Lockhart any longer. The man had no professional ethics, and certainly didn't deserve the title of professor. Everyone was still talking about Lockhart's humiliation when the Weasley twins froze. George grabbed Fred's arm and pointed toward Flourish and Blots. Ted and the others followed their line of sight and saw a sight no one expected. Mr. Weasley and Lucius Malfoy were mid-fight inside the bookstore, hair flying, fists swinging. It wasn't subtle. It was gloriously, embarrassingly physical. The twins surged forward, but Molly pinned them back, panicked. "Stop! Don't fight!" she hissed. The bookstore clerk tried to intervene, trembling. "Sirs, please, gentlemen, this is a respectable establishment." But both men were beyond listening. They only wanted to put each other down. Fred and George, restrained by their mother, were still shouting encouragements. "Hit him, Dad! Go on! Kick him in the groin! Hard!" Molly clamped her hands over their mouths to keep them quiet. Mr. Weasley, fired up, lifted his leg as if to do exactly what the twins shouted. Lucius, hearing the comment, clamped his legs together in reflex. The twins were held back, but not everyone. Miss Peggy, who had been carrying a second-hand cauldron she'd bought for Ginny, threw it at Lucius with a perfect, furious arc. Lucius couldn't dodge in time. The cauldron smashed into his face. He staggered and nearly went down. Mr. Weasley moved in to press his advantage when the owner of Flourish and Blots finally pushed through the crowd. "Enough, gentlemen. This is a bookstore, not a gladiatorial arena." The intervention carried weight. The owner's authority calmed the fracas. Lucius straightened, bloodied and furious, picking up the broken cauldron and the second-hand textbook meant for Ginny. He thrust the book at the flustered girl. "Keep it safe," he sneered. "This is the only thing your father can give you." Then he looked at Arthur Weasley. "A few dozen galleons a month. What are you risking your life for?" The taunt might have started round 2 on the spot. Ron at the doorway clenched his fists, ready to rush in, but Ted held him back. "Stay calm," he said. "This is an adult matter. It's not our place to interfere." Ted wasn't being cowardly so much as pragmatic. He'd been thinking about the coming school year and the fragile thread of events that had to remain intact. If the diary wasn't destroyed according to the plot, who knew how it might be used by Lord Voldemort later? The diary, he'd heard the twins say, wasn't just embarrassing, it might be a Horcrux. If it survived this year, it could become a decisive weapon. Mr. Weasley had recently been leading operations to seize dark artifacts. Some families with shady reputations, Malfoy among them, had been targeted. The manor had been searched. Certain items had been confiscated. The Malfoys looked prosperous now, but their position had been weakened. Ted thought about it all and kept Ron from charging into an adult fight. Lucius's anger had its roots in family history. Lucius's father had been at school with Voldemort and was among the earliest to join the Dark Cause. When the second generation of Death Eaters rose up, they wrecked the wizarding world for a decade. The name Death Eater made people tremble. Large pureblood families often hedged their bets, sending 1 or 2 members to demonstrate their position while keeping the family intact. But sometimes there was only one heir. Lucius had been born into the expectations and loyalties of his line. It was almost impossible to escape when the reckoning came. Many ancient families nearly died out because of such choices. Ted let the weight of that thought hang in the air. For a moment, the bustle of the street, the shouting fans, Lockhart's humiliation, and the bookstore scuffle seemed all part of the same muddled, dangerous world, where publicity and pride could collide with old grudges and real danger. It was like the Malfoy household. I'd heard they only barely cleared themselves by giving up more than half the family fortune, mainly because Lucius was cunning and low-key enough that there wasn't direct evidence for a trial. He insisted he had been under the Imperious Curse, which gave him a chance to avoid punishment. Those who openly committed evil either died or went to Azkaban and were still suffering. Even so, the Malfoys had had a rough few years. Decades ago, would the family have feared a dark arts search led by some fringe head of a ministry department? Recently, Lucius had even been forced to get rid of another batch of dangerous heirlooms simply out of fear of being caught. These were all ancestral properties. Money. He'd already looked down on the Weasleys. This only made him angrier. Ted glanced at Ginny, who had her head down, flustered, clutching a second-hand cauldron and textbooks. He suspected Lucius might be looking for revenge. If Lucius had known the diary Voldemort left in his house was a Horcrux, he never would have let it out of his hands. If they messed this up now, there might not be another chance to destroy the notebook later. This Horcrux was different from the others. The first one, carrying Voldemort's memories and personality from that time, self-aware. Later Horcruxes weren't like that. Perhaps Voldemort had refined his technique and wouldn't leave a loophole that could turn against him. Maybe he had tricked Lucius then, telling him the diary was the key to opening Slytherin's chamber. Using one secret to hide another is an old trick. Giving the diary to Ginny could have been Lucius's attempt to retaliate against Mr. Arthur's anti-pureblood policies. If Ginny opened the chamber and killed Muggleborns while still being of pureblood descent, it would be a devastating blow to her father's pro-Muggle stance. The more Ted thought about it, the more he realized the old pureblood versus Muggleborn struggle hadn't really ended, even with Voldemort gone over a decade. The bookstore fight had just wound down. The two combatants were still trading insults when a commotion outside cut everything off. Ted and the others turned as a group of wizards came tearing up the street, robes flying, shouting at the top of their lungs. "Run! Run! There's a monster! Something's come out of Nocturne Alley. Not just one, lots of them. Ah, get away! Mummy, where are you?" Wizards, used to long stretches of peace, weren't prepared for sudden chaos. Panic spread in an instant. Children screamed, wives cried. The street turned to confusion. There was the distant sound of smashing, like a demolition crew at work, and a handful of wizards were still firing spells, though that didn't seem to be slowing whatever was coming. The whole scene looked like a Muggle town in the middle of a disaster. Ansu, who'd been watching the fight, instantly received a signal from Ted and shot up, flying toward the chaos. Ted's psychic link with Ansu let him half close his eyes and switch to Ansu's perspective. Less than 100 meters away, at a fork in the road, a group of people were fleeing, some normal wizards, some hunched, big-nosed figures who didn't look trustworthy. Among them was the owner of Borgin and Burke's, the shop Ted had spied on before. They were pouring out of Nocturne Alley with strange things chasing them. The first were fish-headed beings, greenish-blue, slimy, scaled, with long, spindly limbs and upright gait. Merpeople, not the mermaids people imagined. These were more fish than human. Ted had only ever read about them or seen moving portraits, never seen them alive. The books called merpeople brutal. They had their own language, a few could cast spells, and they would even eat people. 4 or 5 of them, led by a taller one, carried crude sticks and brooms, shouting in their tongue as they chased a dark wizard out of Nocturne Alley. Spells occasionally knocked them down, but their magic resistance was strong. They got up and kept going. Behind the merpeople came 7 or 8 creatures that looked like goblins, similar noses, ears, and stature, but more feral, cruel, bloodthirsty eyes, mouths full of sharp teeth, dirty, claw-like nails. They'd snatched cauldrons and benches from the street and were howling as they charged. Goblins weren't supposed to be this reckless in numbers like that, unless they were led. And indeed they were. A monstrous leader loomed behind them. The leader was over 2 meters tall, broad and thick, covered in fur, its arms hanging nearly to its knees. Its face had the shape of a brown bear, with sharp teeth and a pig-like upturned nose. A length of iron chain still dangled from its wrist. Ted's appraisal flickered through his mind. Level 10 Rampaging Hill Giant Marauder. Level 2 Anti-Magic Monster. Total level 12. Its magic resistance read as high as level 5. It was the highest magic resistance Ted had seen so far. Even a weakened Voldemort might not have reached that. High-level magical creatures, unicorns, phoenixes, could have that sort of resilience. Prolonged exposure to magic can force adaptation. If something is constantly subjected to spells and survives, its resistance can improve. This hill giant had been experimented on, upgraded into an anti-magic brute. Apparently, it had been a commodity bought and sold on Nocturne Alley, captured by a group of dark wizards and held for sale. In Professor Quirrell's experimental memories, Ted had seen traders selling otherworldly creatures in Nocturne Alley. The Ministry had laws against private capture and sale, but where there was profit, people found ways around the rules. This giant's sales had stalled. It had been stored in Nocturne Alley for over a month. The dark wizard owner had used it to tinker with magic in his spare time, accidentally increasing its resistance. A small accident let the creature break its magical shackles, endure diffindo and stupefy, smash the wizard in the head, and throw a tantrum that tore apart the underground warehouse. Other imprisoned goods took the opportunity to escape. What Ted and the crowd were seeing was only a part of the chaos. More trouble was still raging inside Nocturne Alley. The hill giant howled, months of torment turned to rage as it burst out, followed by its temporary goblin allies. 2 spells hit it, and it barely hesitated, only losing patches of fur. Gringotts, standing between Diagon and Nocturne Alley, bore the brunt. The red-clad goblin guards saw the danger and shrieked, "Quick, close the doors! Close the doors!" That cry drew the giant's attention. It charged straight at the 2 goblin guards, like a maddened bull at a matador's cape. One goblin thrust a long finger and chanted a protective goblin spell. It did something, only enough to make the hill giant sway a little. The creature leapt the steps, 6 or 7 at a time, and then swung a huge iron bar it had probably torn from a cage. Although the goblin guard had cast protection on himself, the blow sent him flying like a cannonball. He hit the ground, spitting blood. Before he could struggle to his feet, something else appeared. A face similar to his own, but harder, cruel, and cunning. A makeshift dagger, a shard of broken glass wrapped in rags, was plunged into his eye socket. Blood spurted everywhere. The goblin who had ambushed and killed the respectable distant relative laughed triumphantly, smeared with blood, dancing wildly in the street. 115. Small test level 2 goblins, level 3 marrows and goblin captains, level 4 marrow leaders, a level 12 hill giant. There were 20 or 30 of them. The wizards and witches who normally lurked in Nocturne Alley, the kind who dealt in the underhanded and petty, were no match, because they fought one by one and even sabotaged each other. They ran faster than anyone else. Any truly capable wizard wouldn't be eking out a living in Nocturne Alley. One goblin had already died over there, but the remaining monsters kept coming. The hill giant swung its iron club, ready to finish off another goblin in a festive red coat. The death of his companion had clearly made this goblin guard wary. His magic was far better than the goblin who'd just fallen. With a loud pop, he apparated away without a wand. After all, the money belonged to Gringotts, but his life was his own. The hill giant's club smashed into empty air and then into the white marble steps, cracking the stone. Where had the goblin gone? Had it been smashed away by the blow? The giant's slow mind puzzled for a second, then it stopped thinking and charged after the fleeing wizards. Kill! Kill all those people who capture and torment me every day. Leading the charge, the giant was followed by goblins busy stabbing the dead and stripping their gear. The shouts and the sight of wizards running in terror only fed their bloodlust. They wanted more. Enemy repelling jinx. A spell hurled a marrow backward. Defindo. Another cutting curse tore a wound along a marrow's flank, but it only left a radial gash. The creature's vitality was tenacious, and it wouldn't be fatal for a long time. Ted had noticed before that many adult wizards were actually ordinary in strength, skilled in everyday magic or the sort of domestic charms most people relied on. Combat magic wasn't taught at school, and most of them had never learned it. Unless you sought it out yourself or had the right connections, you simply wouldn't know it. The ministry liked it that way. Keeping the populace weak made them easier to manage. But when something dangerous broke out, 8 out of 10 wizards were completely flummoxed. They had never faced this. Of the remaining 2 who could fight back, one usually wasn't good at combat spells. Old people, the weak, children, and some wizards who judged themselves poor fighters had already turned and run toward the leaky cauldron and the exit at the end of Diagon Alley. A few who had some confidence stepped forward to try to hold the monsters off and buy time, but their magic did only so much. From the start of the chaos until now, it had been less than 2 minutes. Mr. Weasley and Lucius Malfoy had already emerged from the bookstore and were standing in the street. Damn it, Lucius cursed, then drew his wand and apparated away with a pop. He just ran. Apparition, of course, wasn't something every wizard could do. It required extra tuition in 6th year, a ministry test, and a license. Used improperly, it could splint you, tear you apart. Most people traveled by flu or by portkey. Mr. Weasley was braver. Seeing the panic, he drew his wand and shouted, "Molly, get the children out of here. Everyone, calm down. I'm Arthur Weasley, head of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. Don't panic. Gather around me." The few remaining wizards instinctively moved closer. "Arthur, be careful. Children, stick close. Let's get out of here first." Molly was anxious, first to protect the children and then Arthur. "No, we're not leaving. We can help Dad. We can fight," George shouted. Fred drew his wand. "We can help." Ron piped up too, which made Molly's voice pitch up a good 8 octaves. Ron felt his face burn. Betrayed. Ted didn't have time to savor the drama. Up ahead, including Mr. Weasley, 5 adult wizards were retreating. Their spells were competent, but their combat repertoire was small. Tripping jinxes, leg-locking jinxes, tickling charms, practical domestic hexes. The most damaging spells they used were Stupefy, Expelliarmus, Impediment Jinx, and the Cutting Curse. Mr. Weasley stupefied a marrow, and 2 others were left bleeding from multiple Defindo wounds. But that was it. The hill giant in the distance was about to charge. Ray of Frost! Ted flicked his wand, and 3 blue arcs of magical energy shot from the tip, latching onto the 2 leading marrows. Ice crept across their skin, slowing their limbs, making their movements stiff and awkward. Marrows were particularly intolerant of cold. Even if frost didn't do massive damage, its chilling, numbing effect was excellent. Ted had practiced firing multiple rays at once to slow groups. "Don't engage head-on. Fall back while you fight," Ted shouted, and his companions reacted. Expelliarmus, knockback jinxes, skidding jinx, leg locker curses, 7 or 8 spells burst toward the 4 lead marrows. 3 were knocked down. Only the bigger, higher-level marrow leader kept moving. Ted considered using a killing spell like Ice Arrow, but he held back. The first rule of survival was not to stand out. With the adults performing so poorly, being too lethal would only invite questions later. Stupefy. Ted hit the marrow leader. Its eyes rolled, and it swayed, but wouldn't fall. Ted struck again, and finally felled it. By then, the hill giant was almost upon them. It was enormous, the ground trembling with each step as it charged forward like a runaway dump truck. "Quick, go! Hurry!" Mr. Weasley's face had drained of color. He'd never seen a battle like this, let alone faced such a beast. Use the skidding jinx. Skidding smooth. 6 skidding jinxes at once. 6 spells from Ted's left and right flew in perfect synchronicity, and when the hill giant strode onto that patch of cursed ground, it split its legs wide and came crashing down with a thunderous thud, toppling over stalls and scattering produce. It looked like it had pulled something vital as it hit the ground. "Go, go, go! Move!" Ted shouted. As the old saying went, of the 36 stratagems, running is often the best. "You go first," Mr. Weasley told those ahead, covering the rear. The hill giant flailed on the ground, clutching itself and knocking over everything it could reach. After 5 or 6 seconds, it staggered to its feet, thick-skinned and stubborn, and tried to charge again. "Stupefy!" Mr. Weasley fired. The red bolt struck the giant's head. It merely rocked, shook its head, and roared. Then it took another step onto the greasy patch and went down again, face first. The other wizards hurled spells at its back, but they bounced off. Diffindo only shaved off clumps of coarse hair. Enemy-repelling Jinx and Stupefy had no lasting effect. One quick-thinking wizard used Locomotor to lift a roadside stall and hurl it at the giant. If that had hit a human, it would have been devastating, but the wooden stall splintered like kindling. The hill giant barely reacted. After being knocked down a second time, the giant dared not rush. It still roared, but it began to advance cautiously, slipping and sliding with every step, each footfall a scrabbling, grinding shuffle across the slick patch like a creature fighting an invisible slope. 16. "It's in the papers. It's in the papers. Whoosh!" A cauldron sailed through the air, and Mr. Weasley ducked out of the way. The goblins had caught up, too. They were clever. After a few failed charges, they stopped trying to run straight in, and instead began scooping up anything they could find in the street and hurling it. Most of it didn't go very far, but the constant barrage was threatening enough. "Hurricane sweep!" someone shouted, and a gust of wind roared down the street. The hill giant, at least 800 or 900 kilos by Ted's estimate, simply lowered its head and planted itself against the gale. The goblins 7 or 8 meters behind were not so lucky. They were blown end over end, tumbling and rolling down the skidding Jinx like overripe pumpkins. There was the same problem as always, too few direct damage spells being used. Ted watched, furious. As a wizard who had trained in combat, he had little patience for people who hadn't. If you didn't know defensive or offensive magic, you were asking to get killed. "You lot, use Aguamenti!" Ted barked at Hermione and the others. They didn't ask why. "Aguamenti!" came 8 voices, Peggy, the twins, and the rest. Streams of water erupted from their wands like faucets, swung open full blast. They were still mostly students, only Peggy in 6th year, the rest children, but the combined effort was enough. The 8 streams pooled into a large puddle spreading toward the hill giant. "Frost Nova!" Ted stepped forward and thrust his wand. A cold shock slammed out in a 60-degree fan, his modified Frost Nova. He timed it perfectly, so the cone hit the hill giant about 12 meters away. The water on the ground amplified the cold. In an instant, ice shot up around the giant's feet, stopping just above its knees. "Keep it up! Wet it more!" Ted shouted. Another wave of aguamenti answered him. A few other wizards joined in. Ted spat out another frost nova, modified. Mr. Weasley and another wizard cast freezing spells. Frost nova! Frost nova! Frost nova! Working with the water, Ted released 3 more frost novas. Finally, the magic-resistant hill giant was frozen solid. I don't know how long this will hold. Let's go, Ted ordered and led everyone in a quick retreat. They scrambled back into the leaky cauldron's yard, slamming and sealing the wall. From there, they heard the giant roar. It had already started to smash through the ice, but by then, it was no longer their problem. The Ministry's Auror squads and the Hit Wizards teams were already on their way. By noon, everyone was shaken. The Weasleys took them home. Aunt Molly made a feast: big steaks, roasted chicken legs, cheese, vegetable soup, dessert, to soothe their nerves. Mr. Weasley, who still had official business, ate a few hurried bites and hurried to the Ministry to find out what had happened. George patted Ted on the shoulder. Not bad, Ted, Fred grinned. I always heard you were brilliant, but I didn't expect this. No one in our year is that good. Your Nova magic, beautiful. Ron, on the other hand, was eager for praise. Me, look at how well I did aguamenti and the skidding jinx. Praise me a little. Only Peggy indulged him. Ron, you did well too. Ron swelled with pride. Of course. Did I ever tell you about last year at Hogwarts? We fought a troll and 2 other monsters. Later, we took on 3 trolls at once. Aunt Molly emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Excellent. Come on, little Ronnie. Tell me how you fought the trolls at Hogwarts. Ron hunched his shoulders and glanced at his older siblings for support, but they'd already sidled away. Ted didn't know how Ron embellished the story. He and his companions slipped out into the yard to avoid being roped into it. May Merlin bless little Ronnie. Ted sat on a long bench and sorted through the morning's gains and losses. Because this had happened in public, he had to play things low-key. No flashy magic, no items, no cards. If he'd had room to kite the giant, he could have taken it apart in time, but today wasn't the time for that. Many of the wizards present weren't skilled combatants. If Ted had gone in too boldly, he'd have caused more harm than good. This way, everyone cooperated, restrained the monster, and retreated safely. The system didn't credit him with slaying the hill giant. Freezing it didn't count, so he got no experience. But that was fine. Safety first. Before he was fully revealed, he had to keep a low profile. On the surface, Ted had shown only a novel freezing spell he'd accidentally learned and had helped adults control the giant. Behind the scenes, though, he'd done more. Puck, his spirit crystal servant, had been hidden on a nearby wall, acting as a relay to amplify Ted's newly developed mind power, Spirit Spike. Invisible psychic spikes had drilled into the giant's head and dulled its spirit, leaving it disoriented and unresisting when the freezing began. With that temporary confusion, the usual magic resistance couldn't fully kick in. Even a creature with high resistance was vulnerable to a well-timed surprise. It had been the perfect stealth strike. Hit by Ted's spirit spike, the hill giant's brain went muddled, its eyes glazed, and it offered no meaningful resistance, while everyone poured water and cast freezing spells. Ansu had used the chaos too, setting a fire in a second-hand magic shop in Nocturne Alley. In the pandemonium, a small blaze seemed normal enough and helped cover their tracks. Ted didn't get experience for fighting the monster, but he completed 2 tasks. First task, sudden situation. Blue. The bustling magic world was suddenly attacked by a monster. The wizards present with wands were outmatched and fled in panic. Objective. Deal with the sudden monsters. Retreat safely with friends and try to help others escape danger. Reward. 450 experience, +1 level magic resistance. Card Anticipate the Enemy. Adults can't always be relied on in a crisis. This one's on me. Second task. I'm in the newspaper. Green. Although the British wizarding community is small and insular, it still has newspapers. Objective. Be published in a mainstream newspaper. Reward. 200 experience. Card. Get famous early. Brother. The first task was straightforward. Probably one of those hidden quests that only appears after completion. But when had he made the papers? Ted didn't have long to wonder. About 10 minutes later, Mr. Weasley reappeared through the fireplace, brushing dust from his clothes with a feather duster and waving a stack of newspapers. Molly, quick! Look, we're in the paper. Aunt Molly leaned over. Ron, who had been bracing for a scolding, let out a relieved sigh. The others crowded round at the shout. The Daily Prophet emergency special lay open in Mr. Weasley's hand. 117. Predict the enemy first. Celebrity, green. The Daily Prophet, the highest-selling paper in the British wizarding world, ran a dramatic photograph that took up half its front page. On the left stood a hulking hill giant, terrifying and broad-shouldered, a few goblins visible behind him and two merpeople lying on the ground. On the right, Mr. Weasley and several other wizards led the way, Ted and the others behind them. It turned out the photographer who'd snapped pictures of Lockhart hadn't run away after the chaos. He'd hidden, taken photos, and gathered material. He'd done his job well. The angle and composition made the candid shots excellent. A shame they were still in black and white. If they'd been in color, they might have won an award. The 90s and the wizarding press still used monochrome photos, proof, perhaps, of how backward the magical world could be. The emergency special edition focused on the monster attack in Nocturne and Diagon Alley that morning. According to the paper, the monsters had come out of Nocturne Alley. Initial findings suggested a dark wizard smuggling dangerous creatures was to blame, and Aurors were investigating. All escaped creatures had been contained. 7 people were listed as casualties, 4 dead, including 1 goblin, and 3 injured. The most seriously wounded had suffered 2 broken legs and nearly died. The least injured had a smashed head but recovered at St. Mungo's within 10 minutes. Diagon Alley and Nocturne Alley, the 2 busiest shopping streets in Britain's magical community, had suffered property damage. Many shops were affected. Borgin and Burke's had taken the worst hit. A monster exploited the panic to start a fire. Fortunately, the shop's magical defenses limited the damage, but smoke and scorch marks were unavoidable. It was a major event. The wizarding world usually seemed placid to outsiders. Wizards courted danger now and then, and sometimes died in spectacular fashion, which became the kind of anecdote told for years. But 3 wizards and a goblin killed in one incident shocked people. In a community with a small population, that was a heavy toll, roughly 1 in 10,000 of Britain's wizarding population. Even within hours, the paper's coverage had whipped up a frenzy. Many criticized the Ministry of Magic as incompetent and squandering taxpayers' money. Radical purebloods demanded tighter supervision of visitors with unfamiliar magical knowledge. Others wanted harsh punishments and a crackdown on Nocturne Alley's illegal trades. A few voices credited Mr. Weasley and his group for their response, though. Ted read everything. It was a feeding frenzy for the Xianyu crowd. His little forum usually drew 20 or 30 people who came to drink tea and watch the fun, but now the whole country was buzzing. Since Voldemort's defeat, Diagon Alley hadn't seen anything like this in over a decade. That it had now been attacked by monsters was explosive news. Ted scanned the reports, ministry statements, and invited commentary. His name showed up only once, and otherwise was lumped in with general praise for the rescuers. The paper had a short line saying his modified special freezing spell had excellent effects, and nothing more. That was exactly what he wanted, enough credit to be noticed, not enough to draw dangerous attention. He felt his decision to stay low had been the right one. In the afternoon, he took Hermione home. Jerry went his own way. School was starting soon, and Ted had planned to close the Xianyu Forum for the last few days anyway. After the attack, Diagon Alley was deserted, and the leaky cauldron was quiet. Who would come to drink now? Old Tom wasn't bothered. He'd weathered many storms in his decades of living. Ted went back to his room and collapsed on his bed. "Well done, Parker," he told his spirit crystal servant. Freezing the hill giant had been mostly Parker's doing. "My pleasure," Parker answered, bouncing a little on the table. And Ansu, starting that fire was satisfying. Fire and water, merciless to each other. Borgin and Burks should be more careful next time. Ted pulled out a few pieces of dried beef to distract Ansu. The raven liked shiny things, and whenever Parker strutted, Ansu would want to peck him for his pride. Ted lay back and examined 2 new cards he'd acquired. Precognition, blue spell card effect. For 10 minutes after use, mental awareness is heightened, allowing a strong chance to anticipate sneak attacks and sudden events. Cooldown, 6 hours. This card was interesting. Mind power related, fairly rare. Ted tried it. He closed his eyes, picked up an apple, and tossed it above his head. As it came down, he dodged instinctively without seeing it and caught the apple in his hand. The sensation thrilled him. If he could learn to simulate this kind of mind power, he wouldn't have to rely on cards forever. The second card, Celebrity, green, spell card effect, +2 charisma for 30 minutes. Cooldown, 12 hours. Note, you'll be noticed wherever you go. Life in the spotlight isn't easy. Did being in the newspaper make me a celebrity? Ted smiled. He'd been a little mistaken about newspapers at first. Back in the world he'd come from, newspapers were dying in the internet age, but here they still mattered. The wizarding world was small and relied heavily on print. The Daily Prophet was still a household red. Even if not everyone remembered his name, 80 to 90% of British witches and wizards would know of him now. That was impressive. In the days after the monster siege, Diagon Alley was put under martial law. Ted saw patrols, 4 or 5 ministry officers with serious faces, hands poised over wands. These were from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, enforcers, and aurors. The rank and file were typically level 7 to 9. Some elites reached 11 or 12. Embarrassed by the incident, the ministry had thrown resources into patrolling the shopping streets. Nocturne Alley got a special operation. Many gray area wizards who made a living there were arrested. The usual penalties were a few months to a couple of years in Azkaban. Ted couldn't resist. He covertly used Parker to plant false traces around the entrance to Borgin and Burke's, causing the authorities to seal the shop. With their connections, they'd reopen eventually, but the trouble and inconvenience would sting. It felt good, vindictive and petty, but satisfying. He didn't linger, though. School started soon. He needed to pack, especially to clear out the basement. After 2 months, it had become a full laboratory. He had to dispose of experimental waste from alchemy and potion work and erase traces. Places where wizards live always seem to attract peculiar creatures, boggarts, ghouls, even potato spirits, because ambient magic condensed where people practiced spells. If he didn't clean up, the leaky cauldron might turn into a haunted pub. He'd only just finished when the system pinged him. Ding. Talent. Otherworld knowledge triggered. Discovered. Monster Hunter Rise Palico Meal Recipe Compendium Green. Monster Hunter Rise Palico Meal Recipe Compendium Green records Palico meal recipes used by the felons of Kamura Village. Requires 190 XP to redeem. Palico meals? Ted blinked, remembering how those cooks could somehow dominate the Palico cart. No way. My luck's average. He laughed and redeemed the compendium. Fine. Buffing food fit his otherworld cooking experience. He'd study it properly in the school kitchen after term began. Maybe Professor McGonagall would like a taste. He shrank his luggage to the size of a fist with a freshly learned shrinking charm and tucked it in his pocket. With Ansu and Parker in tow, he said goodbye to old Tom and took a cab to King's Cross. Ted arrived early this time. When he passed through the barrier to platform 9 3/4, there weren't many people yet. He boarded the train and took a compartment. About 40 or 50 minutes later, Hermione came into the station, her smile bright as she pushed her luggage trolley. Watching her depart, Mr. Granger couldn't help but get a little misty-eyed. His little girl wasn't clinging to him anymore. 118. Start school or drive a car? Hermione hurried after Ansu, practically buzzing with excitement. She found Ted's compartment and pushed the door open to see him reading a thick tome. Ted. Her voice brimmed with joy. Ted looked up. Hermione was tugging her luggage. Ansu perched on her shoulder. She wore an off-white blouse and a pale yellow dress dotted with tiny flowers. Her hair was neatly done, no doubt Mrs. Granger's handiwork. Hermione had never been good at styling her own hair. Ted smiled. Hermione, sit down quickly. What are you reading? Hermione asked as she slid into the seat. Ted flicked his wand, and Hermione's trunk floated up to the rack all by itself. A book about the myths of King Arthur, he said. An old volume I bought at a Muggle bookshop, published about 80 years ago. Hermione watched the luggage settle so effortlessly and exclaimed, Your stats are getting more and more impressive. It's nothing. I'm sure you've improved a lot too. Of course. Hermione tilted her smiling face, half pleading for praise, clearly delighted to hear it. Ted had already appraised Hermione once and knew she'd grown. She'd improved far more than he'd expected. He had seen her less than a week ago. He hadn't imagined her attributes would change so much in such a short time. Hermione Granger, level 3 wizard. Strength 3, Constitution 4, Agility 4, Intelligence 8, Perception 6, Spirit 9, Charisma 6, Luck. Talent, straight A student red. Skills, Magical Point 2, Magic Resistance level 1, Charm level 2, Transfiguration level 2, Potions level 2, Herbology level 1. She'd actually awakened a talent. It was probably a level below Ted's own, Academic God, but it was still formidable. Ted had appraised 70 or 80 students at school last year. Only a handful had talents, almost always green quality. He believed that with age and study, many promising young wizards would develop talents. Since they'd last met in Diagon Alley, Hermione's magic and potions had each risen by a level. That was impressive. You couldn't simply add points to those stats. Magic depended on innate aptitude and development, and it mostly increased with age, usually peaking in someone's 20s. Potions was one of the trickiest subjects for Hogwarts' first years to level up in. Practice required ingredients, and ingredients cost money. Most students had limited opportunities to brew. By the end of a year, more than half of the students hadn't even reached level 1. Snape's idiots, as Ted had heard him call them. Neville, for example, was terrible at potions. There were talented kids. Harry, for instance, had been level 2 in potions by the end of last year. That owed a great deal to his mother's talent, and of course, to Snape's rather intense attention. Whenever Harry had detention, he seemed to spend it processing ingredients and brewing potions. Snape's private stock was almost entirely available to him. According to Harry, Snape in detention wouldn't snap and sneer, but would sit quiet and thoughtful, sometimes completely still for half an hour. Ted's own potions level was already level 3, but that was because he'd worked at the Slug and Jigger's apothecary over the summer before his first year. He'd reached level 1 quickly in Snape's class, level 2 by finals, and level 3 by brewing potions constantly during the holiday. Practical experience had raised his proficiency. Even so, he thought reaching level 5 in potions would be very hard without adding points. His talent was average compared to someone like Snape. So for Hermione to raise potions by a whole level over the holidays when she couldn't use the stat readout was startling. Had she practiced by mental simulation, or had she suddenly grasped some key principle? And her intelligence had risen too, from 7 to 8. She had enormous potential. Ted changed the subject to potions, and Hermione lit up, eager to share her latest insights. They talked happily about Ted's little Xianyu website, about Hermione's trip to the seaside, and the time slipped by. It wasn't until just before the train was due to leave that Jerry hurried into the compartment, breathless. "Whoa, there you are. I almost missed it." He stowed his trunk and exhaled. He had privileges and had to use the Ministry of Magic's special flu connection to get to the platform. Ministry delays had nearly kept him from making the train. The Hogwarts Express was already hissing and steaming, the whistle sounding as it prepared to depart. Jerry sat down and looked around. Where are Neville and Ron? And Harry? Where is he? Did he go to the loo? Ted and Hermione froze and exchanged a look. Oh no. Ted suddenly remembered his visit to the Weasleys and Arthur proudly showing him his greatest creation. Across town at King's Cross, Neville, Ron, and Harry were about to find themselves in a serious problem. The Weasleys had a big family. There were always unexpected complications. On the way to the station, they'd had to go back for forgotten items 3 times. Harry and Neville had run into Malfoy earlier in Diagon Alley and had been forced into a brief confrontation before Malfoy slunk away. Then, Harry and Neville had had ice cream and rushed to the station, where they met Ron. They meant to wait for Ted and Hermione, but now it was they who were late. When it became obvious they couldn't wait any longer, the 3 discovered something was wrong. Ron had run headfirst into the brick barrier at the entrance to platform 9 3/4, landed on the ground, and had a huge bump on his forehead. "Ron, are you all right?" Neville and Harry helped him to his feet. "I'm not all right," Ron groaned. He was seeing stars. "I feel dizzy. What happened?" Neville reached out and touched the spot. Nothing felt different. Harry, skeptical as ever, decided to try himself. He charged at the barrier, but taking care not to repeat Ron's mistake. He still ended up on his backside with a yelp, clutching his rump. Ouch. What's going on? Is this thing broken? He asked, pointing at the brickwork. The situation was bad. Something had gone wrong with the barrier to the platform. A house elf in a filthy pillowcase, Dobby, crouched hidden around a corner, peering at them. He had appeared to Neville before and terrified him. Since then, Dobby had kept away, fearful of disgracing the heroic image Neville might hold of him. But his determination to stop Neville, or any of these children, from going to Hogwarts had not waned. He thought the school was dangerous and that the great savior was being lured into peril. He had to save Neville Longbottom. Goblins and house elves had their own ways of sensing and manipulating magic, different from wizards' stat systems. The charm Dobby had laid on the barrier was simple. It was effectively like a Confundus-style jinx that interfered with the original enchantment on the gateway. Ordinarily, the barrier could only be passed if one met a minimum running speed. This prevented muggles from accidentally breaking through. After all, no sane person would try to run into a wall. Dobby had raised that minimum speed requirement, making it impossible to pass unless you had a very long running start, roughly the equivalent of running 80 yards. The three tried again and again, to no avail. Their antics even drew the attention of Muggle station staff. What were these three kids doing, loitering and banging into a wall? They realized they couldn't get onto the platform and were going to miss school. Neville began to sweat with anxiety. Ron was numb with shock, unsure what to do. They were 12. Their minds weren't full of complicated contingency plans. Missing the first day of term felt like a catastrophe. Harry stayed calmer, but didn't want to be late on the first day either. He glanced around and saw the old, battered car Mr. Weasley had driven to the station earlier. The Weasley parents had gone off to deal with something, leaving the car unattended. "Ron," he said. I remember you said your dad's car can fly." "Of course. It flies super fast." "Then, can it fly to Hogwarts?" "Huh?" Harry smiled faintly. He already had a plan. Neville and Ron both made a face and begged him not to, but Harry's grin only widened. Time waits for no one, and soon it was time for the Hogwarts Express to depart. Ted and Hermione went to find the head boy and head girl to report that some students hadn't boarded yet. "Harry, Neville, Ron, they haven't boarded," they said anxiously. At that moment, Penelope Clearwater was chatting with Ron's sister Peggy in the head boy-girl compartment and didn't look worried when she heard this. "No need to worry," she said. "Even if they miss the train, they can get to Hogsmeade through the Flu Network or even go straight to Professor McGonagall's office. Every year, a few people miss the train. It's not the end of the world." Peggy added cheerfully, "It'll be fine. Mum and Dad will bring them over. Maybe they'll even get here faster than us. After all, Express is just a name." Ted thought to himself that they probably overestimated their brother's sense and underestimated their ability to cause trouble. Not many families have a flying car, after all. Ted and Hermione had no choice but to return to their compartment and keep chatting and snacking. Jerry wasn't too worried. They were witches and wizards. Missing a train was small stuff. An hour passed, and a faint thump, thump, thump sounded as if someone were knocking on the window. Ted opened it to let Ansu in and asked, "Why are you back so quickly? Is the weather bad outside?" Hermione and Jerry looked out. The sky was clear. Ansu cocked her head and squawked, "There's something strange in the sky. Caw, cow!" "A strange something?" Ted leaned out the window, the wind whipping his hair back. Hermione grabbed his sleeve, alarmed. "What are you doing? It's dangerous." Ted peered up and saw a big black dot against the sky. "Blimey!" He waved wildly, even turning a napkin into a bright red cloth to get someone's attention. The dot seemed to move. "What's happening?" Hermione and Jerry asked. Ted pulled himself back into the compartment. "I think it's Mr. Weasley's flying car. They're up there. Someone waved a moment ago, but I couldn't tell who." Hermione's eyes widened. "That's not good, whoever it is." When Jerry swallowed the rest of his snack, it tasted suddenly unappealing. They really had found a way to cause trouble, he thought ruefully. He ought to have stayed on the platform. An hour earlier, when it was time to depart, the three were still on the platform panicking. Ron muttered, "We're late. We're going to lose points. Do you think we'll get detention?" Harry shrugged. "I have a plan. I think we can fly the car." "What?" Ron's mouth dropped open. Neville went pale. "I'd rather drop out and go home." "Come on," Harry said. "We have to try. If Dumbledore really wants us to leave, we can always go home later." The other two shivered at that. Last year, Harry's plans rarely went smoothly. This Harry had a streak of recklessness. Still, the three second-year students with no driving license and no flying experience started the Weasley car and took off, chasing the Hogwarts Express. The strange thing Ansu had seen in the sky was indeed the Weasleys' flying car. There were no other oddities on the train. It rattled and swayed until evening as it crossed the Scottish Highlands. By then, it was getting dark, and after half a day in the air, the three in the car were exhausted. Fortunately, there were no buildings or other vehicles up there, so they avoided collisions. But cars need fuel. Even magical ones have limits. By evening, the car was sputtering and shaking every few minutes. Neville took to nibbling his sleeve as if writing a will. Ron stroked the dashboard, whispering encouragement. "Come on, you can do it. Remember all the roads you've driven. This is nothing. Hold on for the Weasleys." Harry's hands were white on the wheel, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his face was set with stubborn determination, like someone prepared to fight to the end for the car. The vehicle slowed so much it struggled to keep pace with the train. By the time Ted and the others reached the school gates, Harry and his friends hadn't arrived yet. They were close and headed the right way, but still not there. At the start of term ceremony, Ted and his friends were pulled to the castle by thestral-drawn carriages and led inside. The western afterglow had sunk below the mountains, and the castle's lanterns were lit. The great hall glowed, and a sumptuous feast lay ready for returning and new students. The ones who had taken the boats from the station had arrived earlier. This year's latecomers were still missing. Sorting began. The Sorting Hat, apparently composing new verses all year, sang another clumsy song. The founders had clearly neglected the part about artistic flair. Everyone just wanted the sorting to start. There seemed to be more first years than last year. In Gryffindor were Ginny, the youngest Weasley, and a familiar face, Colin Creevey, a devoted fan of Harry's. Ravenclaw had Luna Lovegood, pale, with light blonde hair and a distant gaze. Her father edited the Quibbler. As always, odd things have their followers. Once you accept the absurdity, it can be oddly appealing. Beyond familiar faces, Gryffindor accepted two half-human students, a boy with dog-like ears named Chimaha and a girl with cat-like ears named Caitlin. The castle's aesthetic was definitely changing. Watching the delighted first years, Ted felt that amused senior condescension, first-year sprouts so green and bouncy. Didn't the older students feel the same when he had been new? After sorting, Dumbledore introduced the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Gilderoy Lockhart. The position had a poor reputation, and Lockhart did nothing to help it. He arrived in an ostentatious, flashy suit with hair so slick it shone. He grinned narcissistically, promoted his books, and talked at length about himself. If Ron had been present, he would have cursed at the show-off who nearly ruined his family's finances. Then came the school song segment. Everyone chose a tune, but to Ted's surprise, every pair of eyes turned toward him. He blinked. Why me? The look on everyone's faces said the same thing. Ted, lead the song. He tried to refuse. No, they all replied. Just sing when asked. Don't be coy. For about 10 seconds, no one said a thing. All eyes were fixed on Ted. Even Dumbledore's hand hovered awkwardly over his wand. There was no choice. The important task of leading the school song fell to him. Ted had wanted to save face, but it was too late. He started with a silly little tune, the Little Cabbage melody. Hogwarts. Oh, little cabbage. Hogwarts, yellow in the field. Hogwarts, 2 or 3 years old. Hogwarts, without a mother. His clear, childlike voice floated through the great hall. It carried an odd, lingering melancholy that settled over everyone. The song, ridiculous as it was, filled the room with an inexplicable sadness. Several of the younger students who had lost their mothers felt their eyes sting. Luna covered her mouth and silently wept. Even some professors looked moved, as if seeing a brave orphan facing the world. The feeling was quietly contagious and hard to shake. Only 2 people seemed unaffected, Snape and Dumbledore. Snape stared at Dumbledore with a flash of astonishment. Ted's singing had a strange, subtle power. The way it worked was akin to a charm wedded to emotion. Dumbledore, eyes meeting Snape's, shook his head slightly and mouthed the song's words along with the tune. Masters of legilimency and occlumency like Snape and Dumbledore could normally read surface thoughts and spot deception from eye contact alone, but Ted's voice had acted like a medium. It influenced emotions directly, bypassing ordinary defenses. Had Snape and Dumbledore not been so practiced at shielding their minds, they might have been swept away. It was the effect of Ted's talent, voice of heartbeat, read. He had been experimenting with sound magic, sonic effects, and mind-influencing abilities to bolster allies or unsettle opponents. Tonight's performance had been an accidental demonstration of that talent's emotional reach. Not exactly a spell, not purely magic, but something more subtle and dangerously persuasive, like a Vila's charm without the obvious glamour. Many students didn't recover until after dinner. Some older girls looked at Ted with a strangely maternal affection. Hermione squeezed his hand tightly, as if to lend him strength. Ted inwardly regretted his choice. Maybe he shouldn't have sung such a sorrowful ditty on a night that was meant to be joyful. Being the king of poetry would have to do for now. My condition seems to be improving, he thought. I'd been stuck for days, but today I finally started writing again. Chapter 120. Flying Car. I'm free. The feast had begun, and barely had everyone taken their seats when Jerry and Hermione started scanning the hall, faces growing more anxious by the minute. They haven't arrived yet, have they? Hermione whispered, panic threading her voice. Should we tell Professor McGonagall? Jerry looked just as worried. If they told McGonagall, whatever had happened with the flying car would be exposed, yet leaving it unreported felt wrong if someone was hurt. Don't worry, Ted said calmly. I'll send Ansu to look for them. He pinched a tissue, let it go, and the tissue transformed into a tiny paper crane in midair. It flapped its wings and darted away. Ansu abandoned the plate of fries in front of him, sighed for dramatic effect, and followed. 10 minutes later, the crane returned. Ansu perched nearby and let out a loud caw. How is it? Hermione leaned forward. Caw! Caw! It's fine! Caw! Caw! Professor McGonagall found them, Ansu crowed. Both Jerry and Hermione visibly relaxed. How are they? Ted asked. Ansu cocked his head, thought for a second, and then, lacking the right words, hunched his shoulders, twisted his neck, and made a face like someone caught red-handed. The meaning was unmistakable. Jerry's eyes widened. It isn't good, he breathed. Not good was an understatement. It was a disaster. The Weasley flying car, running on fumes, had used its last reserve of power to get within the school grounds, and then conked out. The wheel slipped in Harry's hands. The car lost control, slammed into the humping willow on the castle's southeast side, near the Forbidden Forest, and took a savage beating. The old tree, a sentinel planted back when James and Sirius were students, was nearly split in two. The car plunged into the canopy, was bounced and battered like a toy, and the three occupants were flung out into the mud. Ron's wand snapped in the chaos. Then, as if waking from a fright, the car's lights flared and its horn blared. With one final lurch, it tore free and sped off into the forbidding dark of the forest. Flying car, I'm free, it might have shouted. Hogwarts could not fail to notice such a commotion. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape arrived on the scene and corralled the three limp, mud-smeared students. Harry, Ron, and Neville looked like they'd been rolled in a bog. The humping willow itself was badly mauled. A large swath of the canopy had been stripped bare. Massive branches snapped like twigs, and the trunk looked as if it had come close to splitting. McGonagall's face had gone hard as stone. The severity of her glare set the air chill. Snape's eyes flashed with anger so dark it felt violent. He looked as if he could tear their throats out with his bare hands. Neville's cheeks trembled. Ron nearly shrank into himself. Snape hinted at expulsion in a voice that made both boys freeze. Fortunately, McGonagall took charge and led the three Gryffindors up to her office. Speak, she demanded once they were inside. What exactly happened? Were you attempting to chop down the humping willow? Neville's lips quivered. Ron's face had drained of color. Both were useless at the crucial moment. Harry stepped forward. I'm responsible, Professor, Harry said quietly. It's my fault. It started with the platform. No, Neville blurted out suddenly. No, Professor. It was because of me. It's my fault. Ron tried to disappear entirely, then mumbled, It's my family's car. I'm the one who brought it. McGonagall looked as if she wanted to laugh at their competing confessions. "Are you three making a deal to be expelled together?" she snapped. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Harry, pragmatic as ever, began at the beginning. A strange house elf, an ill-judged idea to use the car, and the attempt to get to the castle. He softened the tale and tried to shift blame away from Gryffindor House. "Professor McGonagall," he added, sounding small, "please don't deduct points from Gryffindor. We were reckless, and it caused serious consequences, but we don't want the house to be disadvantaged on the first day because of us. You can punish us in any other way, just not points." Those words hit McGonagall where it mattered. House honor meant a great deal to her. This plea, honest and selfless, carried weight. She neither forgave nor condemned outright. She merely waved her wand and produced a self-refilling plate of beef sandwiches and set 3 pumpkin juices on the desk. Then she left, and for the briefest moment, the corners of her mouth twitched into something like a smile. Outside her office, Ron hissed, "Blimey, Harry, genius." Harry puffed up, pleased. "Well, she does like students who care about their house. You always say my plans are silly, but I'm not." "Neville, there's much we can learn from you," Neville muttered, too awed to be literal. Ted's paper crane had already sent word to his friends. He had scribbled a note, "I'll hide some food. Jerry will bring it back to them tonight." Reading that, Harry handed his sandwich to Neville. "Eat a little less," he said. "We'll have proper meat tonight." Ron didn't wait for the proper meat promise. Sandwich in one hand, pumpkin juice in the other, he tucked in. They'd missed the sorting ceremony, and regrettably, Ted's tear-jerking new school song, but otherwise, the night passed without further incident. At breakfast the next morning, the great hall buzzed with questions. Everyone wanted details. How did the platform fail? What exactly happened with the car? Harry, proud in spite of himself, told the story. Ron added his flourish about the fight with the willow and the shame of his wand breaking. Broken didn't do it justice. The wand had snapped at a 15-degree angle, still crookedly attached, but exposing the unicorn hair core. It was the one wand in the family, Bill's old wand, and money was tight. Ron looked as if he might cry. In the end, he wrapped it with magic tape. It was absurdly practical, sticky, flexible, bewitched to stay useful. Ron grinned weakly. "About as good as new," he said, though everyone could see it was a very patched-up solution. Ted sipped water and tried to hide his expression. He imagined Snape's fury as a guardian seeing his charge nearly killed in a reckless stunt, murderous, possessed. If Ron and Neville could have read Ted's thoughts, they would have felt rather put upon. She was driving and dragged us into the tree. Hermione, predictably, was livid. She went through them like a list of offenses. When something goes wrong, contact an adult. Use flu powder. Think ahead. You could have been killed and buried under a tree. Do you know what you were doing? Her scolding was sharp but not unfair. The 3 of them shifted nervously, remembering the Willow's fists and Snape's glare. "Snape must have been seeing red," Ron grumbled. "He practically promised to expel us." "He can't expel us alone," Neville said, "not unless he becomes headmaster." "Thank Merlin," Ron said, eyeing his bumped wand. "He'll never be headmaster. Mark my words." Ted hid a smile and pretended to finish his drink. He'd already arranged for Jerry to retrieve the hidden food later, work that would keep at least some of them out of trouble for the night. Their conversation was cut short when an owl swooped down and dropped a flaming red envelope at Ron's place. He snatched it up, and as the parchment unfolded and the room filled with a shrill, instantly recognizable voice, he went pale. "Oh no," he muttered. The entire table turned. It was a howler,